The rebels stopped where they were and huddled to guard one another, and the threat of my arrows dropped away to mere wounds. No more clean kills. I shifted my aim to the oncoming Nuong Hongun and sent the shafts flying at him. He parried the first with his blade, an arrow that forced little threat to him, and yet the parrying could not help but shave his speed. I did not care whether I hurt him or not, and I loosed at him fast, one after another, the mysteries of the bow turning through my mind while his pace crawled slower and slower. After a dozen breaths, the quiver on my back finally emptied. A savage grin split his face, and just as he gathered to lunge, he caught the smile rising on mine, and with a single flicker I was gone from the spot. My movement technique came on like a thunderclap gathering its wrath, and settled like a still sea drawing in clear light, and I tore away at a speed that stunned even him. It was fast enough to crush the very will to give chase out of Nuong Hongun. Even with the fresh secret technique and medicinal pill he had lately come by, he could not close the gap. It was too much of a beating to be fair. Nuong Hongun stayed rooted where he stood, furious, watching me leave with nothing he could do about it. If his two archers had still been alive, he might at least have slowed me, and as it happened, those two had been the first to die. He ground out through his teeth that I would not escape, then turned back to see to the wounds of what men he had left. On the far side of it, once clear of the dark market, I made quickly for another courtyard I rented inside the county. I had taken many such courtyards on purpose, to have a fresh place to lie low whenever things went wrong. The archery was a fine thing, I thought, but the longbow was weak. Its one flaw was the force behind the shot, enough to deal with men at the Yonyu realm, barely enough for the bone forging realm. Against an elite of that realm like Nuong Hongun, the bow had been all but useless. Once I reached another city, I would buy a good bow if the chance came, and I would not let my cultivation slide either. Internal strength was the root of everything, and the finest bow in the world was worthless in the hands of a man who could not draw it. I took the wooden cabinet out of the space grid and packed the silver away into its compartments by portion, so I could reach it easily when I needed it. Early the next morning, the Zhou family came to deliver herbs as always, only to find several alchemists dead. When they reached my courtyard, there was nothing but bloodstains on the ground. The man himself vanished without a hair left behind. The Zhou family flew into a rage and joined hands with the rebels to comb every corner of Pyongyang County. I did not know whether eldest Miss Jiang Sanam and her people had been caught up in it. Playing the part of an ordinary man, I set about buying things across the county. Food, fresh water, anything I judged I might need. In a single day, I crammed the wooden cabinet and the space grid full. Food above all. Foraging in the wild was usually a sure enough thing, but I worried about the strange happenings out there, and since the grid carried weight for free, I would naturally bring all I could. The next morning, I looked at a steaming bun in my hand with an odd expression, since it was the very bun I had put into the space grid the day before. After 7 or 8 hours, it was still hot, exactly as it had been going in. The grid was quite something. Was time simply frozen inside it? All sorts of thoughts crowded up, though with only the one grid I had no way to test any of them. Since time stood still in there, spoilage was no longer a worry, so I decided to treat myself a little better. I drew every dry ration back out of the space grid and went out into the streets again to buy fresh food. With the Zhou family's frantic search, the whole of Pyongyang County had turned chaotic. The already quiet streets emptier still, everyone shut up inside their houses. Once I had my purchases, I hurried back to the courtyard and stopped wandering about. I had first thought to look in on Elder Jung, since back at the medical hall he had been good to me, and I had even weighed helping him leave Pyongyang County too. But the man was gravely hurt now and had a family to mind, and the rebels would simply never let an alchemist of his sort walk out. I checked over the supplies in the space grid, confirmed everything was right, then sat cross-legged and cultivated my internal strength. The sound of steady breathing filled the room while the whole night slid by in quiet. Early in the morning, I used the disguise technique to wear the face of an ordinary man and left the city. Nothing went wrong at the gate, since few people alive could see through a disguise technique, and I had ground mine to the peak, so smooth that no common eye could catch a flaw. A few miles out from the walls, I found the appointed place, the wind-moving stone. I did not go straight up to it, but took a high point to watch from, and as the dragon hour drew near, figures began to drift in below. I swept the ground around and found no ambush laid, so it was likely no trap. I checked the light, wasted no more time, and leapt across the treetops until a moment later I stood at the wind-moving stone. Every eye there turned to weigh me, and by the movement technique I let them see, an ordinary bone-forging man would have been about my match. Without a real fight, that was all anyone had to judge by. I saw Ji Dokbong, and the two of us traded a nod without a word, everyone quietly sizing up everyone else. One look around told me these were all martial artists with cultivation, not a plain man among them. Jian Yegang looked over the gathering and said in a heavy voice that the hour was about right, and it seemed this was all of us. He would not waste breath, he told us. 301 ahead, and he would lead the road as far as Hyungbun City. The moment he finished, the crowd broke into an uproar, since the price ran past what most had braced for, and even martial artists found that kind of silver bitterly hard to save. Someone said 301 was steep and asked whether it could come down. Another put in that the road ahead was meant for helping one another, and that 300 right off the top was too much. Jian Yegang kept the smile on his face, raised a hand to press the noise down, and allowed that it was a bit dear. Any man who did not want to pay was free not to walk with them, since he forced no one, and the silver was given by choice. A few traded glances, because with the country in chaos and no caravans moving, striking out alone for another city left even martial artists faint-hearted. Someone asked in a low voice whether, if they paid, Boss John could vouch for their safety on the road. He shook his head, smiling, and said he could promise no such thing, only that they would advance and fall back together when the time came. At that, one man snorted that with this much silver he could just as easily go on living careful inside Pyongyang County, and why bother with a long haul to somewhere else? He turned and left outright. Others wavered, then peeled away after him, until a moment later only 6 of us were left. I looked at Ji Deokbong with some surprise, since a man greedy enough to try stuffing all this fake medicine into my arms had somehow proven willing to spend these 301. Jiang Yegang, for his part, only smiled at the others leaving and said that fewer people were in truth the safer number, then told us to pay up. Ji Deokbong stepped forward first with his 301 pressed into Jiang Yegang's hands, and, seeing someone pay, the rest of us handed our silver over one by one. I had tucked 501 into the big pack on my back just in case, and I counted mine out and gave it across. Jian Yegang put the silver away, his smile broadening. He said that since we would be traveling together from here on, we should each give a short account of ourselves, so we could look out for one another on the road. Ji Deokbong named himself and his staff techniques. An old woman tapped the crutch in her hand and gave her name as Peng Yu. When my eyes went to her, my nose twitched, since a faint fishy sweetness drifted off her, the smell of a potent poison. I patted the longbow on my back, gave my name as Jin Mok, and called archery my trade. Jiang Yegang nodded and said the hour was late, that we should move, and that from here to Hyungbun City, if all went smoothly, we would arrive in about 5 days. He set off, and the rest of us fell in behind. We were all martial artists, and in stamina and footwork we ran far faster than ordinary folk. No match for horses, but no slow pace either. I glanced back at Pyongyang County, only blurred outlines now across the miles, and could not help a stir of feeling. I had spent months in that county and come out of it from a menial hand who could not afford a bite of meat into a man who held real skills. I dropped my eyes to the mark on my arm, and the farther we drew from Pyongyang County, the quieter it grew. I had once feared the thing might draw powerful entities to me, and now it seemed the mark was purely a curse laid on my body, a weight, and nothing more. An ordinary man wearing it would long since have been drained dry, and only because I rose so fast had I pressed it down instead. Or perhaps there was another reason, that against the vast trough of food that was Pyongyang County, a single grain of rice like me was simply too small to catch that entity's eye. After better than an hour without a stop, the group paused for a short rest. In the dense wood, Ji Deokbong looked at Jiang Yegang, his face bright with eagerness, and said there was no one about now, that they should hurry and split the money. Jiang Yegang laughed and scolded him for his haste, saying it was not as though he meant to keep it. He asked whether the old geezer was truly willing to leave Pyongyang County, when he had thought the man would die of old age. Ji Deokbong took the hundreds of one handed to him, shook his head and said Pyongyang Mountain had turned strange, that he had not dared stay. These last days above all he had not been able to eat or sleep in peace, so Pyongyang County was likely bound for some great calamity. Jiang Yegang's face changed a little, and he trusted the old friend's words. No wonder the man had kept pressing him to lead a team out. He asked whether Ji Deokbong would keep going once they reached Hyungbun City. Ji Deokbong thought a moment and shook his head, saying they would see when the time came, that first they should just get there. A few dozen yards off, I came back from relieving myself and saw the two of them murmuring together. I could not help a small envy, since whatever they were saying, it surely had to do with money. I had suspected from the very start that the two of them knew each other, because Ji Deokbong had handed over his silver far too readily, not the way a greedy man paid. Still, I felt no ache over that money. Set beside leaving Pyongyang County, a little silver was nothing, and with alchemy in my hands, earning that much again was a matter of a few batches of pills. The group rested a spell and then took up the road once more. At first there was still a main road to follow, but the farther we went the more the way blurred, plainly too long since any caravan had passed, many of the paths lost under weeds. We pushed on without incident and met only a few refugees whom everyone gave a wide berth. Jian Yegang glanced about, read the lay of the land, and said there should be a ruined temple nearby where we could shelter for the night. He had ridden with a security escort agency in his younger years, north and south across the country, and had only lately hung it up. He had thought to pass his old age quietly in Pyongyang County, until so many things drove him back out onto the road. He led us in a few turns and found the ruined temple at last. The sight of it drew my heart tight, since both times before that I had met a supernatural entity. It had been in a place just like this. Yet with shelter from wind and rain right there, we could hardly turn it down. The temple was very old, and the inside worse, plainly tramped through by a great many people of late. We built a fire to boil water and sat together eating our dry rations in silence, and I kept a wary watch all around and found nothing amiss. I felt for the mark on my arm, and there was nothing strange in it either. By now I treated the bone-attaching curse as a detector for the supernatural, and it worked most of the time. It set me wondering whether I ought to keep a sliver of the mark on me even after my internal energy grew strong someday. The night passed in peace with nothing strange, and a measure of relief settled in me. It seemed that even in a world this restless, a man would not meet a supernatural entity around every bend. In the blink of an eye, 3 days went by. Against how fresh we had been setting out, the group looked road-worn now, though along the way we had grown used to one another, and the smoothness of the trip had eased everyone's minds. Jian Yegang's gift for reading the road was strong, and I counted myself lucky to be following his team. On my own, forget everything else, just puzzling out the route would have left me hopelessly lost, walking circles in the wilds by the time the food in my space grid ran out. Jian Yegang glanced at the sky and urged us on, saying we would spend this night in the forest, and that everyone should quicken the pace since dark was coming. No one spoke, and we all sped up without thinking, every one of us obedient to his word. Then Aum Cheung pointed ahead in surprise and said there were lights up there, and we looked and saw faint lights flickering in the distance. Ji Dokbong turned to John Yegong and asked whether there was a village nearby, and John Yegong frowned and said he did not remember. The old woman Peng Yu asked in a low voice whether we should go and beg lodging in the village, since a village was beyond doubt safer than the open wild. If there was a choice, of course we would rather go. The others left the decision to John Yegang, and he shook his head hard and said no. He said that with the world in such chaos, a village appearing here all at once was a little strange, and that we would go around it. No one raised any objection. We traced an arc wide of it and pressed on, our speed climbing without our meaning it to, as though somewhere beneath thought we all wanted to be far from that village. Then Em Chung pointed ahead and said there were lights up there, and we looked and saw the lights flickering in the distance. Ji Daopbong turned and asked whether there was a village nearby, and John Yegong frowned and said he did not remember. The old woman Peng Yu asked in a low voice whether we should go and beg lodging. I was listening in silence when my Chungsim technique opened of its own accord, and my mind cleared, and my face changed hard. This talk, this scene, had it not just happened a moment ago? Why was it running again? And that village, had we not already gone around it? Good heavens, I thought. Had everyone lost their memories together? I looked around me, and somewhere along the way wisps of white fog had begun to seep through the trees. The sight of everything dropped away to almost nothing, while the village in the distance grew clearer and clearer. Jiang Yegong's eyes cleared, and he looked around him, at the mountain village most of all, and his face went pale as he said this was wrong, that we had been here before. I asked how we were to wake the others, since he surely had some trick, and without the Chongxin technique, I too would have been charmed under by the supernatural presence and never woken. He shot me a look of surprise but had no heart just then to press me on it, and instead took an incense stick from his pack and lit it. Threads of blue smoke spread out around us, and the four others, Em Cheong among them, dazed for a moment, and when they looked again at the village in the distance their faces changed hard. Jian Yegong did not stop to explain that the mountain village was a haunted, eerie thing, only that we should go, and quickly. He ran headlong forward while the rest of us kept close behind, not daring to lag. I followed at the back, turning the Chungsim technique over and over, the icy feel of it slowly steadying me. Watching the mist crowd in from every side, I strained to see farther, the cold sensation seeping up into the sockets of my eyes. It was working, and a rush of joy went through me, only to die at once, since farther on there was no other path, only that same small mountain village. We were closer to it now than the first time, close enough to make out the houses inside. The land lay flat and open, the houses ranged in neat order, with fertile fields and mulberry trees and stands of bamboo, and little paths crossing everywhere, a very picture of a paradise on earth. Through the thin haze I could even see many figures within, every one of them turned toward us, as though they stood there waiting for us to come. A shiver ran through me and I shouted for everyone to stop, that we had drawn even nearer to that village. Everyone startled, and Jian Yegang, remembering that I had been the first to wake, was inclined to believe me and halted in his tracks. He asked me anxiously what I saw. I told him houses and fields, and many people standing there facing us, and my face was grim as I said it. Right then the bone-attaching curse felt so icy it seemed about to freeze my arms stiff, and the chill in my heart ran worse still. If we could not clear this hurdle, I could forget ever laying eyes on Hyungbun City. Ji Daopong turned to Zhang Yegang and pressed him to think of something, since if anyone could lead us all out, it would be the seasoned Zhang Yegang. He told everyone to stay close to him, that he was going to run at full speed, and he drew a half-burned red candle from his pack with a pained look on his face. The candle looked no different from the sort ordinary households used, yet he lit its wick with great care, and a ring of red light spread out and wrapped every one of us. Whether or not it was an illusion, under that red light the chill that had soaked through us dissolved completely, and a deep calm filled our hearts. The mist along the edges drew back wherever the light touched, as though it feared this one candle. At his shout we ran, and the rest of us kept hard on his heels. All 6 of us were skilled enough in footwork that even at his full sprint we held close behind. The mist ahead fell away, and the little mountain village at last did not rise up again, and every heart eased a fraction. To see that village once more would very nearly have driven us mad. Then Jian Yegang shouted for everyone to stop, his face gone deathly pale. Everyone looked at him in confusion, but I caught sight of the red candle in his hand, already burned down past its middle in that short while. It was still shrinking before my eyes fast enough to watch, so that at this rate it would gutter out in another quarter of an hour. Ji Daopong asked what was wrong. Jian Yegang said the candle was burning too fast, that we had not gotten clear of the entity at all but had drawn nearer to it instead. He tested the 4 directions with the flame, and only toward the southeast did the burning slow, and he called for us to go that way, and rushed out at once. I looked around me, my heart shaking. The Chongsim technique was a fine thing, keeping my head clear, but a clear head alone was not enough. If we could not win free of this place, we would likely be devoured wide awake. Worse was the faint, cold gaze at my back, raising the hair on my neck, as though the entities might spring at any moment. Then Peng Yu pointed into the distance and cried that the village, that mountain village, had appeared again. Everyone turned to look, and sure enough, it was the village we had seen before. After all that running in circles, we seemed to have come right back to where we started, and the red candle in Jiang Yegang's hand was less than a third of what it had been. He looked at the candle, then back at the village, and ground his teeth and drew another one from his pack, a pure white candle this time, unlike the red. He said in a heavy voice that this entity was too strong, that now we had no choice left but to gamble, or none of us would leave this place alive today. Someone asked what he wanted us to do. He said that in a moment he would light this white candle and throw it away, that its power was the very opposite of the red one and would draw the supernatural to it. Behind us would turn very dangerous, and everyone was to run as fast as they could. It was a desperate throw of the dice, but without it we would only keep circling until the red candle burned out and every one of us died. Eom Chiong and the rest looked at one another, and none of them moved to stop him, since no one had a better answer and they could only follow his lead. Zhang Yegang lowered his head and lit the white candle. An indescribable scent lifted off it, and he threw it backward with all his strength, its flame guttering and flickering yet never going out. The next moment he was already tearing forward with the red candle in hand, his movement speed better than half again what it had been. The others were startled by his speed, but only I kept steady at his back, and then Ji Dukbong behind me. Eom Chung and Om Jung let out muffled grunts and drove their sword blades through each other's bodies, and as the blood spread their figures vanished all at once and reappeared close behind Ji Dukbong. The old woman Peng Yu tossed a pill into her mouth, and a green aura spread across her face on the instant. With a single step forward, she overtook the 2 swordsmen and caught up behind Ji Dopong as well. A low chuckling sound seemed to drift through the mountain forest, and the mist around us thickened, though mercifully it was surging toward the rear now, the fog ahead of us thinning by the moment. Everyone's spirits lifted a little, since the white candle had truly taken effect, and the feeling of being watched without end had vanished completely. Jian Yegang's face was still flushed, but as he watched the red candle in his hand burn down at a gentler pace, he let out a thin breath of relief. He glanced back to be sure the rest of us were keeping up, and we were, all of us hard on his heels. Just as he began to turn forward again, his gaze snagged on the old woman, Peng Yu, and it froze there. A green mist had settled over her face, which was nothing strange by itself. Only now her eyes had gone entirely black, without a single flicker of human feeling, nothing but a cold and empty dark. I was running just behind John Yegang, and when I saw his expression change so hard my heart lurched. I looked back and caught the wrongness in Peng Yu at once. She seemed to feel the weight of our 2 stares, because the corners of her mouth began to peel slowly apart, splitting wider and wider, until the grin reached all the way to her earlobes. The sight raised every hair on my body and drove a spike of ice straight into my chest. Zhang Yegang shouted for me to draw and loose. Of the 6 of us, everyone else was pouring every last scrap of strength into running, and I was the only one who had kept anything in reserve. I twisted at the waist and sent the arrow in my hand streaking toward Peng Yu. Before it could close even half the gap, her head burst apart on its own, and flesh and blood and green mist bloomed outward in every direction at once. I caught my breath by instinct, yet a thread of dizziness still washed through my mind, and when I glanced down at my bare skin, it had already turned a sickly green. Clear of the cloud, I called a medicine bottle into my hand and threw 3 or 4 detoxification pills down my throat, in one go. Then I tossed the bottle to the others, who caught it on reflex, saw what they held, and swallowed at once. None of us had been ready for Peng Yu to change like that, but every one of us had years in the martial world. Holding our breath had been pure instinct, so once the pills went down, we pressed the poison flat inside us. No one spoke. No one could say when the ghost had crept into Peng Yu and made her its own. For now we only kept our heads low and ran on. I could not have said how long we ran before John Yegang finally stopped. He spat out a fine mist of blood, and the flush in his face eased a little, while the red candle in his hand burned calm and steady, the fog around us gone entirely. Ji Deokbong's face was so pale he looked ready to faint. Eom Chung and his wife Eom Jung were both soaked in blood, their faces the color of the dead. I was worn to the bone myself, since the bone-attaching curse had been so active in the crush that it had eaten far more of my stamina than usual. Still, of all of us, I was in the best shape. Jian Yegang drew a deep breath and told us to push on a little further before we found a place to rest. We were out of danger for the moment, yet he clearly felt we were still too near that place, and for safety's sake he wanted more distance under us. No one argued, since by now the others trusted him completely. Those 301 had been well spent. Without Jian Yegang that day, it was hard to say how many of us would have died, and being wiped out to the last man had been a real possibility. I looked at the red candle in his hand and made up my mind. Once I had a chance to ask him plainly, I would buy myself a few dozen and keep them in my space grid. The world outside was simply too dangerous. We walked another half an hour before he stopped for good, checked our surroundings with care, and gave the group a nod. Only then did everyone truly ease, though the fear still clung to us like damp cloth. We found a fit spot to camp, and one by one, exhausted, the others dozed off. I sat cross-legged and turned the Gyeonghyun force through my body, drawing my stamina slowly back, and the night ran on to dawn without another incident. We traveled through the daylight after that, but none of the loose ease of the days before us remained. Now every one of us stayed on a knife's edge of alertness. During one rest, Ji Dokbong sniffed at the air and muttered, half to himself, that he must be worn out. He could swear he smelled roasted meat from the Chueyang house, and the smell was wonderful. I glanced at him. That nose of his was truly something. The truth was that, to comfort myself a moment earlier, I had used a trip aside into the trees to take some roasted meat out of my space grid. I finished it in a few bites. The instant I came back, Ji Tiobong had caught the scent. Zhang Yegang laughed and asked what was so special about the Chueyang house's roasted meat, and swore that the moment we reached Humbun City the next day, the treat was on him. More than half the red candles were gone, and a whole white one had burned away. But as long as we came into Humbun City alive, it counted as a victory. Ji Deokbong chuckled, waved a hand, and let it go. Travel, rest, travel again. At last the outline of a city rose into our sight, and every heart lifted, for we had finally reached Humbun City. 5 days was not a long road. Without that village, the stamina of a martial artist would have made it an easy walk. But the ghost had frightened us half to death, and the old woman, Peng Yu, had died outright. The 5 of us quickened our steps without meaning to, and half an hour later we stood before the gates of Hyungbun City. Set against the little county seat of Pyeonggyeom County, Hyungbun City was plainly far larger, and the sheer height of the walls said as much at a glance. Where Pyeonggyeom County had felt lifeless, Hyungbun City thronged with people coming and going, alive and loud. After we paid the entry fee, the 5 of us stood on the street and looked at one another. Eom Cheong and his wife Eom Jung cupped their hands and said that since we had all come this far, they would trouble us no longer, and that we would surely meet again. Then the pair slipped away around the corner. Ji Deokbong looked at me and asked what my plans were. I thought a moment and said I meant to go on to Sonun City, whether or not I could join the Sonun sword sect. The settled peace of a place like that was perfect for the slow work of building myself up. There would be far more cultivation techniques and secret manuals to be had there too. Nothing like Pyeonggyeom County, where everything had been guarded so jealously. Jian Yegang smiled and told me there would surely be caravans in Hyungbun City bound for Sonun City, and that traveling with one would be far safer. I said the Sonun sword sect was called peerless in all the world, and that having left Pyeonggyeom County at last, I wanted to go and see it for myself. Ji Deokbong looked at me, chuckled softly, and offered that the 2 of us travel together, if it suited me. I could not have asked for more, and I cupped my hands to him. Jian Gyegang broke in that we should not stand here talking, and the 3 of us laughed and set off down the street to find a good inn and a proper meal. Night fell, and in the inn room I sat cross-legged. Earlier, once we had eaten and drunk our fill, John Yegang had gone out to stroll and come back with news. In a little over a month, the Sonun caravan would arrive in Hyungbun City from elsewhere, and from here it would run all the way back to Sonan City. To take the very name Sonan for a caravan told you how deep its backing ran, so this one was powerful indeed, and hitching onto it would make the road to Sonan City very safe. The fare would of course be steep, but I would not be stingy with silver. I muttered to myself that I needed to start moving medicinal pills again, and to see whether any decent pill formulas or cultivation techniques were for sale here, and then I closed my eyes. The next morning I stood before a shop that dealt in everything at once: weapons and medicinal pills and even cultivation techniques. When I asked after internal force techniques, the shopkeeper took a secret manual down from the shelf and laid it in front of me. He said that sometime back a sect disciple, out of options, had sold this technique to them. My expression shifted a little as I looked at the manual. Cloud swallowing force. I asked in a low voice whether learning this technique would bring trouble down on me. Many sects hunted down and reclaimed leaked techniques, above all those touching internal energy. Back in Pyeonggam County, I had not cared, for it was a small place and the odds of being found out even if I learned another sect's art were slim. But now I was in Hyungbun City with plans to move on to Sonun City after, and with a wider field of choices I naturally had to be more careful. The shopkeeper smiled and told me to set my mind at ease. That sect had already fallen into ruin, and the disciple had been its only heir, so learning the manual would bring no trouble, and if anything I would be carrying its legacy on. I nodded, picked up the manual, and read it slowly, and a quarter of an hour later I set it down. The text was only a third complete, yet even so I could see a good deal. Against the startling Thundersword energy it was of course no comparison, but it was already far stronger than the Gyeonghyun force. The cloud-swallowing force had one very particular gift. Once cultivated, it raised the daily amount of medicinal pill a person could take, letting a practitioner absorb pills faster without laying any burden on the body. That single point was enough to catch my interest. As things stood, I could swallow only one Chungryong pill a day, and any more than that set my meridians swelling with pain, and threw the chi and blood of my whole body into disorder. Once or twice was no great matter, but kept up over a long stretch it would surely harm my physical body, so I had tried it only a few times before settling honestly on one Chungryong pill a day. I asked the price. 1,001, the shopkeeper said, his smile spreading wider. I set the manual down without ceremony and turned to leave. Did I look that much like a fool waiting to be sheared? He hurried after me, calling that the price could be discussed, that the shop had pills and weapons too if I would only look. I paused and asked whether they carried bows and crossbows. Of course, he said, and led me into the inner hall where the racks held a far broader spread of weapons. I stepped up, took down a longbow, and drew it to test the pull, my face unchanged as I set it aside and lifted another. Half an hour later I left the shop. The longbow I had carried out of Pyeonggam County was sold, traded for a stronger one, plainly a good deal more powerful than the old. By my reckoning it would serve me without trouble all the way to the bone forging realm. I asked after pill prices too. In Pyeonggam County, a Cho-won pill went for 10 won each on the open market, but here it fetched 8, and the Chongryong pill had dropped from 15 won to 13. Prices were plainly much lower, and no wonder the caravans ran back and forth, since with a gap like that the profit was heavy as long as the quantity held. Hyungbun City also sold the Jangbu pill, and I bought a few of those to carry back, though they ran dear, close to 31 each. I wanted to see whether my Yunyu realm cultivation could handle a Jangbu pill, and I meant as well to master its pill formula. Hungbun City did not sell the Jangbu pill formula either, which left me a little disappointed. The Chongryong pill formula was for sale, but the price came to several thousand won. I muttered that I had been a touch naive before. Things like pill formulas were treasured everywhere. I tried swallowing a single Jangbu pill, and an hour later I opened my eyes with a disappointment plain on my face. The pill's medicinal force was very strong, but it set my meridians swelling far worse than 2 Changryon pills taken back to back. Clearly the Jangbu pill was too much for my Yonyu realm cultivation, and I could not yet bear it. I wondered whether the cloud-swallowing force could mend that the way its manual claimed. I took the manual out of my parcel. After running to more than a dozen shops, I had finally bought this technique at another one for 301. In Hyungbun City, every shop of any size was selling the same cloud-swallowing force manual now. Whether some sect disciple had peddled it to a dozen shops, or the merchants stalked it off one another. That first shopkeeper, seeing me a stranger, had simply thrown out his price in the spirit of shearing whoever he could. His heart had been black as pitch. I spent an hour reading the cloud-swallowing force through and then set it circulating, and a moment later I looked at the system panel. It logged the cloud-swallowing force at entry, 1 out of 100. I willed a fusion. The art folded into my Gyeonghyun force, and the union surfaced on the panel as the Gyeongtan art at a proficiency of 811 out of 1,000. The panel then asked 101 to simplify the Gyeongtan art, and I gave it. and the simplification took. A smile crept onto my face against my will. After this, I would set to grinding proficiency and carry the Gyeongtan art up to great perfection. But first I wanted to know whether this new art truly worked on pill absorption. Sitting cross-legged, I ran the Gyeongtan art, and half an hour later I opened my eyes with joy in them. My meridians, swollen and aching before, had returned entirely to normal, and the medicinal power that had gone unabsorbed was now folded wholly into me. The effect was that plain. I glanced at the Jangbu pill beside me, hesitated, and chose a Chongryong pill instead. The instant its power spread, my meridians began to protest, so I hurried the Gyeongtan art into motion, and the chi and blood surged through me until that thread of discomfort thinned and slowly vanished. My furrowed brow relaxed. The art turned without pause inside me, and the pill's power was drawn in fast, feeding back into my flesh and blood. An incense stick of time passed. I opened my eyes and let out a long breath of stale air, the joy on my face no longer to be hidden. I had reached my limit. 1 Jangbu pill and 1 Changryong pill, and my internal energy grew at nearly twice its old pace. Where the bone-forging realm would once have cost me over 9 months, it would now take a little more than 4. And the Gyeongtan art was not even at great perfection yet, so when it arrived, the daily count of pills I could stomach would climb higher still. I found my fists clenching on their own. My cultivation had never crawled compared to other people's, but given the choice, who would not want to move faster? Most of all in a world as dangerous as this. A stray thought floated up, that the sect this art had come from must have been eaten clean into poverty. Night fell, and I walked the streets of Hyungbun City, livelier by far than the nights of Pyeongyam County. Watching the bustle of ordinary lives around me, my heart quieted a great deal. Given a choice, I would still rather live like this, quiet and small, but this world would never hand a man the chance to choose, and it forced too many things on him, danger chief among them. I passed out of the crowded streets and turned into an alley, far stiller than the way behind me. At the far end, a single shop stood open, dim light spilling faintly from it and throwing the shape of the wall into something that seemed to bear its fangs and claws. It opened only at night, never by day, a strange habit. The evening before, I had found a moment to ask John Yegang where those 2 candles had come from, and he had pointed me to this place. I glanced around, felt nothing amiss, and stepped inside. A hoarse voice asked what I needed. I turned and found a little man no taller than a child, perched on a stool, watching me with a smile. The shop was no different from any ordinary one, without so much as a breath of the eerie about it. I said I had heard they sold things here that could suppress strange entities. The man carried no martial artist's aura, yet he did not feel quite like an ordinary person either, and something about him sat oddly with me. He said I had come to the right place, and drew a red candle from beneath the counter, setting it before me. When I met a strange entity, he said I was to light this, and it would drive the thing off, but only drive it off. If the entity lingered at my side, the candle would burn faster, and once it guttered out, the entity would kill me all the same. I asked the price. 1,001 apiece. So expensive. Everything I owned just then would barely buy this single candle. He chuckled softly and asked what money was worth, set against a life. These candles were not easily made, and in all of Hyungbun City only he sold them. I asked if he had anything else. Of course, he said, and brought out a white candle. He told me to light it to draw the strange entities in at 501 each. That indescribable scent lifted off it, and it carried me straight back to 2 days before. Without a red candle in hand, this white one would be little more than a sharp weapon for suicide, calling a whole swarm of entities to come and devour you. The very thought raised the hairs on my neck. I asked whether there was anything else. A dark red blade appeared on the counter, the body so thin it would surely snap the instant it met another weapon, made plainly for one purpose alone. The evil-breaking sword, he said, could wound or even kill a strange entity in the hand of an ordinary person. I asked the price, and it was 10,001. I told him to show me the next thing. My teeth ached a little. It was not that the sum was beyond saving toward, only that it would take a long while, and the blade, useless in every other way, could do nothing but slay strange entities. He showed no impatience and set a medicine bottle down instead. Delusion-breaking water, he said. 1001, to be smeared on the eyes so a man could see through an entity's illusions. I looked at it with some curiosity, thinking of the old cow-tier legend from my past life, said to let a person see spirits. Had I owned this 2 days ago, I would not have needed to fear circling in the mist. A stick of incense followed, which I recognized. Waking incense, he said. 301, lit to scatter confusing fogs. I asked whether there was anything else, and he shook his head and said that was all. Then asked whether anything had caught my eye. I said I would think it over. I was too embarrassed to admit I hadn't the money. The candles and the waking incense I could afford, but I still needed a good pill furnace for my alchemy, and to buy these now would leave me nothing. Before leaving, I could not help asking why the shop opened only at night, since I truly could see no need for it. He said a little shyly that he slept by day, I looked at him as though I were staring at a ghost. That answer, that face, rather overturned the mental armor I had put on before coming here. So where exactly did the goods in this shop come from? I walked out, took 2 turns about the streets, and went back to the inn. I spent the whole night in cultivation, and early the next morning went out to scout the shops again, this time not only for a pill furnace, but to move my own medicinal pills. When the round was done, my mood was a touch tangled. The shops did buy pills, but they crushed the price down to barely 40% of the market rate. It was near enough the same cut the Jang family had once given me, as if I were their own kept alchemist. It was a world away from the prices of the old Pyongyang County dark market, though the demand there had been plainly unnatural and made a poor thing to measure against. Still, I was unwilling to hand my pills to the shops, so cheap. Besides selling to shops, there was another road to set up my own stall and sell them one at a time. Hyungbun City had a street for just that, where loose cultivators laid out their wares, and I had wandered through it. The goods varied enough, the quality left to each seller to mind. I could refine the pills and go sit a stall there, but that would eat deep into my time. I needed to drive the Gyeongtan art to great perfection so my cultivation could break into the bone forging realm as soon as it could. There was the Jangbu pill formula still to deduce, and by my guess the incomplete formula I had gotten from the Zhou family would let me finish it within a month. There was archery besides, and where Pyongyang County had held almost no archery arts, Hyungbun City had a good many manuals, and I meant to push my own shooting to the next step. All of it drank up my hours, and manning a stall would not be worth the loss. I decided to find someone to run the stall and simply share out a slice of the take. Ji Dokbong's face rose in my mind at once, for in Pyongyang County, he had been the one working stalls, and there was no man more at home with the trade. Mind made up, I spent 201 on a pill furnace and went back to the inn. Ji Dokbong looked at me, a little startled, and asked why I needed his help to sell pills when I could just refine and sell them myself. The shops paid too little, I said with a smile, so I needed him to work a stall, and I would give him half a share of the whole take. Half a share was a bit thin, he said out of reflex, and bargained for 2 shares instead. Done, I said at once. 2 shares it is, and I stepped in, seized his hand, and slapped it in a pledge. He stared at me, a little dazed. Why did this song and dance feel so familiar? Had he asked for too little just now? I left the buying of medicinal herbs to Ji Dokbong as before. Our interests were tied together now, so there was no chance of him trying to slip me false herbs again. Once he learned I was an alchemist, he finally understood why the fakes he had once made were seen through at a single glance. If an alchemist could not read the herbs he refined with, his standing as an alchemist was likely poor indeed. I did not bother with the Chowan pill and started straight in on the Cheongryong pill, which sold higher and drew more buyers in Hyungbun City. Unlike a small seat like Pyongyang County, Hyungbun City held far more martial artists, and those with deep cultivation were naturally more common too. Men of the bone forging realm were not exactly underfoot, but they were nothing Pyongyang County could match. Back in Pyongyang County, I had already carried the Cheongryong pill to great proficiency. So refining a batch now, I could wring every scrap of medicinal virtue from the herbs and turn out 4 pills to the batch. The herbs themselves were cheap, easy to gather if not quite lying in every ditch, and many people grew them at home since they matured fast. It was because the raw stock was so simple that the Cheongryong pill and the Jangbu pill and their like could circulate so widely. The ones needing rare herbs had all been weeded out over the long years. Early one morning I cupped my hands to Jeon Gyegang in farewell, and Ji Dokbong stepped up and clapped his shoulder without a word. By the old plan, Jeon Gyegang would have come on to Sonan City with us so the 3 of us could watch one another's backs. But here in Hyungbun City, he had run into men from his former escort agency. A night of turning over the glory of the old days had settled it, and he chose to follow that crowd and take up escort work once more. There would be plenty of chances to reach Shonan City later. He laughed, and a few more cups together then, and with a bow to us both, he turned and left. We waved him off and went back to our courtyard. Since we had to stay in Hyungbun City over a month waiting on the Sonan caravan, refining and cultivating all the while, an inn was awkward to live in, so we rented a courtyard in the city for half a year. Any shorter term and the landlord balked. The small sum for rent did not trouble me, and I agreed readily. Ji Dokbong handed over a package of the day's herbs, which I checked and found sound. Then I passed him a list and told him to gather those, since I wanted to try refining a new kind of pill. He glanced at the list and looked up in surprise, asking whether these were the herbs for the Jangbu pill. I said, surprised in turn, that he recognized them. He laughed and asked whether I had forgotten what he used to do in Pyongyang County. Though those Jangbu pill formulas he once peddled had been fakes, they were near enough the real thing to know the herbs by. But the surprise did not fade from his eyes. Over these last days, my yield in refining the Cheongryong pill had already astonished him. As an old hand in the martial world, he understood how high a man's alchemy had to stand to reach such a yield. In all of Pyongyang County, he had never heard of anyone who could, and now I meant to try my hand at the Jangbu pill. If the Cheongbryong pill formula was precious to ordinary folk, there were at least channels to obtain it, but the Jangbu pill formula simply did not exist in Pyongyang County. Hyungbun City had it, and no one would bring it out. We had been in the city only a handful of days, so there was no way we had come by it, which left the near certainty that I had deduced it myself. A talent for alchemy like that was truly a frightening thing. I told him not to read too much into it, with a shake of my head. I was only experimenting, and whether it would work at all was far from settled. After so long together, I had a fair read on his character, so I did not trouble to hide much from him. If we were to keep working together, some of my alchemy would have to come to light in any case. He smiled, understanding this for the trust it was, took up the day's Cheongbryong pills, and walked out. I set the herbs in order, carried them into the alchemy room, and got to work on the Cheongbryong pill. Over these days, I would spend a whole morning at it, and with my yield so high, I could turn out 60 to 70 pills in those few hours. Jidokbong sold them at his stall for 11 or 12 won, the price sliding with the quantity bought. After the first 2 thin days, everything I refined sold out with ease, for I never faked the Cheongbryong pill. Refined at great perfection proficiency, they stood at the very top in look and in effect alike. Once a man had taken one, he understood its quality and he came back to Jidokbong to buy more. Counting by the day then, after Jidokbong's cut, I still cleared around 600 won. I could have refined more since Cheongbryong herbs were no trouble to buy in Hyungbun City, and clearing over 1,000 won a day would have been easy. In the end, I smothered the thought, for too much too fast draws trouble. Too little was not what I wanted either, and I compromised on this middle number. Matters of profit always carried risk, and it only came down to how much each man was willing to shoulder. It had been nearly 10 days since we came to Hyungbun City. Beyond the Cheongbryong pill sales finding their feet, the deduction of the Jangbu pill formula had reached its final stretch, going far smoother than I had imagined. This was likely much to do with how high my alchemy now stood, and the Zhou family's incomplete formula had helped a great deal. Besides, all of it meant I could now try to refine the Jangbu pill, and one success would send my wealth climbing faster still. For a long while, I had been eyeing a cultivation technique on the system panel, the suppressing dragon elephant. Only its price of 50,000 won was far past my reach. The pills came along about as I've said, but what made me happiest was that the Gyeongtan art had at last risen to perfection. Beyond the raw cultivation value the art itself added, the great gift of perfection was that once more the number of pills I could take a day went up. At mastery, I had managed 1 Cheongbryong pill and 1 Jangbu pill, and at perfection I could already swallow 2 Jangbu pills a day. With a full 85 points of cultivation progress each day, the time to break into the bone forging realm shrank by another month. The art worked better than I had hoped, and I could feel that as its experience climbed toward great perfection, the pills I could stomach were still slowly rising. The original cloud-swallowing force could hardly have worked so well, I thought, or its sect would never have crumbled so. It was likely the marriage of the cloud-swallowing force and my Gyeonghyun force that had bred this strange change. The Gyeonghyun force was drawn from the startling Thunder Sword energy, an art of the Sonun Sword sect, and it ran faster the more a body could bear. So fused with the cloud-swallowing force's knack for drinking in medicine, it only amplified that gift. At this pace, perhaps before the Sonun caravan arrived, I would break through to the bone-forging realm. After a morning spent finishing the alchemy, I threw myself into cultivating my inner strength. With every breath, my body rose and fell, and a fierce heat surged through skin and flesh, and slowly began to seep into bone and muscle. The day that heat fully soaked through would be the day I broke into the bone-forging realm. I wasted neither afternoon nor evening. I did not sit in the wine houses listening to music or drift into the flower houses. Like some ascetic monk, I bought back a good many cultivation technique manuals instead, and tried fusing the sword art ones. My fire pattern sword was already at great perfection, so no new manual could lift it further. It was not that the fire pattern sword was so strong, only that the sword manuals sold in Yongbun City ran rather ordinary, and the movement manuals fared the same. So I turned my attention to archery, where the 3 archery manuals I had scraped together in Pyongyang County had been the barest fundamentals. Every archery manual I bought here in Hyungbun City gave me real progress. I drew the bow and loosed arrows, cultivating without rest. In the eyes of others, my state just then must have looked half obsessed, a man driving himself past all reason. Even Ji Dokbong, seeing my schedule, could not help but try to talk me down, but I would only listen with a smile, then go on exactly as before. I would tell him he was not the fish and could not know the fish's joy. I was not by nature a diligent man, but the unease this world had planted in me made me hunger to grow stronger, and there was more to it than fear. The plain feeling of my own progress day by day, every drop of sweat earning its reward, had taken hold of me. I did not find it hard. I loved the doing of it, and only by loving the doing can a man see a thing through to its end. In the blink of an eye, another 10 days slipped by, more than 20 now since we reached Hyungbun City. In the alchemy room, I watched the pill furnace before me, feeling out the shifts of the medicine within, and coaxing them with my inner strength. A faint fragrance began to drift, slipping through the cracks in the door and out into the courtyard. And a quarter of an hour later, I worked a technique and slapped the furnace lid. A muffled sound, and when I leaned in to look, a medicinal pill sat there before my eyes. Success. The smile came on its own. Ji Delkbong, waiting off to the side, heard me and stepped up to watch as I lifted the pill out. I asked whether he would like to judge it, and handed it over, and he took it with care. Flecks of unrefined residue clung to it, leaving the whole pill somewhat impure, the sort no martial artist would buy unless the price scraped the bottom. He sought my leave with his eyes, and seeing no objection, he chipped off a sliver and set it on his tongue. A moment later he opened his eyes and looked at me, disbelief moving in them. I asked how it was. Lifting my head, he said with a firm nod that it was a Jangbu pill. It seemed that before long we would be selling Jangbu pills, I said, and could not keep the smile down. Indeed, he agreed, and having watched me deduce and refine one from nothing, he plainly no longer doubted I would be turning out fine ones soon enough. But we might not be able to sell pills in Hyungbun City for a while, he added, returning the pill with a frown. Had trouble come knocking? I was not surprised. Where there was profit, trouble always came. And selling pills was a trade anyone with sense knew ran fat with returns. My Chongryong pills were potent and clean, a single look enough to tell that a powerful alchemist stood behind them. That trouble had held off this long only showed that men in the big cities were more careful in their dealings. They waited until they were sure no great backing stood behind Jidokbong before they showed their hand. There was a gang in Hyungbun City called the Shallow Water Gang, he said, finding a chair, and our business had drawn their eye. He had led their people in circles for a few days, and they should be near the end of their patience. I said after a moment that we should stop selling for now and wait quietly for the Sonun caravan. We had been at it over 20 days and had already earned a fair pile. In that time, I had gone back to the alley shop and bought one of everything but the sword, 2 red candles among them. Of the rest, some silver I stored in the system panel and some I traded for silver notes, keeping only loose silver for daily need. It would carry us comfortably through the short term, and afterward, once we reached Sonun City and joined a sect and had a patron at our backs, I would not be so exposed. He agreed and smiled, for that was just what he had meant to tell me. As an old hand, he had seen too many blood feuds spring up over profit. It was chiefly that we were outsiders in Hyungbun City and would come off worse in any clash with the local gang. Ji Dokbong was greedy for money, but he would never trade his life for it. I could have sold the refined pills to the shops instead, yet with the Shallow Water Gang already watching, and no way to know which shops were tied to them, betrayal came too easy. For less money and no less danger, I would not do it. Another month went by. It had been near 2 months in Hyungbun City, and the Sonun caravan still had not come, while hundreds of Chongryong pills lay stored in my space grid. Because the Jangbu pill formula was already simplified, I could raise its proficiency just by refining Chongryong pills, so it had climbed to mastery and pressed on toward perfection. As for eating Jangbu pills, I was self-sufficient now, and better still, as the Gyeongtan art neared great perfection, I could take 4 Jangbu pills a day, so the bone forging realm, that should have cost me near 3 months, had reached its critical value. A glance at the system panel showed my Yunyu realm standing at 9,976 out of 10,000. I took out a Jangbu pill and swallowed it. It melted the moment it passed my lips, and a rush of heat spread through me. The Gyeongtan art turned fast, driving the pill's energy into every corner of my body, into skin and flesh most of all, which now gave off a heat no ordinary man's would. Under internal vision, I could see wisps of energy inside my muscles, battering and pressing at bone and sinew, the crush growing heavier as the moments passed. Then, like a tremor deep in my soul, my eyes flew open. I rose from the ground, the sound of bone and muscle ringing in resonance through the whole alchemy room. Somewhere along the way I had grown a little taller, standing now like a deep pool, like a looming mountain. Nothing at all like the thin dark figure I had once been. The panel named it plainly, Bone Forging Realm, 3 out of 100,000. A knocking came from beyond the courtyard, a voice calling to ask if anyone was there. I walked out of the alchemy room and opened the gate. A small boy stood outside, licking a candied fruit. Looking up to ask whether I was Jin B, I asked what it was. He said Uncle G had told him to tell me to run. My expression shifted, though I did not panic. I brought the boy into the courtyard and shut the main gate, then sat across from him and asked whether he knew where Uncle G was now. He didn't know, he said, licking the last of the candied fruit from his fingers. Only that Uncle G had not come to find him that day. Uncle G had told him that on any day he didn't come, The boy should find me and tell me to run. That was all. I told him he was a good boy and took out a piece of silver. His eyes went wide on the instant and he tucked it away in his arms, bowed his thanks and skipped off. My brows drew slowly together. The child had plainly been a fallback Jidokbong left to warn me, and now, unexpectedly, it had been used. The real question was who had taken him. For the past month I had stayed quietly at home cultivating, going out only now and then, crossing no one. Jidokbong had kept his own head down, at most helping me buy some herbs. Was it still the Shallow Water Gang? Recalling how they had marked our pill selling a month back. If there was a suspect at all, they were the likeliest by far. But we had gone to ground on our own, so why would the Shallow Water Gang keep hunting us so hard? I went back to the alchemy room, packed everything I owned into the space grid, and to be safe, decided this courtyard could no longer be lived in. A quarter of an hour later, I had wiped out every trace of us and left. A man asked what the honored guest required. I said I was looking for someone. Inside a house down an alley, I stood in a bamboo hat that hid most of my face. This was a place in Hyungbun City that dealt in information, where enough silver bought most anything that was not a guarded secret, and there were several such houses in the city. I could not be sure this one would help me, so I could only try my luck. He asked whether the honored guest could describe the person's features. I gave a brief account of Jidokbong's disguised look, leaving behind no portrait or the like. Since I put little trust in a place like this, they would sell information to me and just as readily sell mine to another. He told the honored guest to wait and said he would have someone check. He passed my note to the back, and a quarter of an hour later another note came forward. I asked how it was, leaning in without meaning to. He said he had found him, glancing at the paper, then looked up and told me that for 51 the honored guest could know this person's whereabouts. I agreed and counted 51 out from inside my robe onto the counter, and he took the money with a smile and handed me the note. I opened it, and on it stood 3 words, Shallow Water Gang. My eyes narrowed. I had not truly expected it to be them. Was it still the pills from before, or something else? Someone had seen my friend taken away by men of the Shallow Water Gang, he said, and he seemed to have been hurt. If the honored guest wished to rescue his friend, they could stand as go-between, though they could promise nothing of the outcome. I asked whether he sold information on the Shallow Water Gang, ignoring his offer. He said that of course he did. For the right price, anything could be bought and sold. I asked the price. He said with a smile that 301 bought the details of the Shallow Water Gang, and he would throw in the very place my friend was being held. Good. I laid a silver note on the counter, and he picked it up, inspected it, found it sound, and tapped the table lightly, and a paper came forward from the back. I took it, ran my eyes down it, and could not help a slight furrow of my brow. He asked whether the honored guest needed anything more. I said no, and stood. And as I made to leave, I turned back and asked whether the shopkeeper would resell what I had bought here. He laughed loud and swore his shop did no such thing, that I might rest easy, and since the shopkeeper said so, I said I was relieved. I smiled, gave a small nod, and turned to go. He watched me walk away, then tapped the counter 3 times, and a man appeared behind him at once. The alchemist the Shallow Water Gang was hunting had come, he said, and told the man to sell it to them, and to set the price high. Then he thought of my parting words and a sneer crossed his face. He said that one just now was likely a greenhorn, so a sharp man should shadow him, and later they would sell his whereabouts for another sum. The man bowed, gave an order in the back hall, and out walked someone plain as porridge, the kind who vanishes in a crowd, made for following others. The shopkeeper told him to go, and nodded well pleased, and the man bowed with a fawning smile and left. Another sum accounted for, the shopkeeper thought, and leaned back easy in his chair, drained his tea. Integrity? What was that? Was it worth as much as money? In high spirits he hummed a tune and rose to relieve himself, and just then a shout came from the back hall and cut off short a breath later. His face changed, his nostrils flared, and the smell of blood drifted into them. Now he truly paled, for there were several bone-forging realm men in the back hall, and everyone had gone silent. Only in the Yunyu realm himself he dared not linger, and just as he turned to flee, someone walked out from the back. He breathed that it was me, staring at me as if at a ghost. I looked at him, cold, and stepped forward to shut the shop's main door. The whole place dropped into dark, only a thread of light through the door cracks lying across his face and leaving it a mottled thing. As the door closed, he wanted to run, but his legs felt cast in lead, too heavy to lift. He shouted to know what I was going to do, pointing a trembling finger, his voice fierce on the surface and hollow beneath. I said, watching him and shaking my head, that he had told me he would not sell my information. He had broken his word. He cried, eyes wide with fear, to ask whether I knew who stood behind his shop, reaching for his backing to steady himself. He was not lying, for a house that trafficked in secrets naturally made enemies, and without strong backing it could never have held its place in Hyungbun City. I nodded. Just as a smile touched his face, a cold light flashed through the room, His body stiffened, his heart pierced, his eyes fixed on me while I met them without expression. His hand fell slack to his side. Had I stood a little nearer, he might have reached the mechanism beneath the counter, but I had simply kept my distance. I shook the fresh blood from my blade and stepped into the back hall. Several men lay there, the two who had meant to shadow me and the one sent to carry word to the shallow water gang. There had been a fair few skilled hands here, 4 in the bone forging realm, and to keep several such men in each of these houses was already a heavy investment. But against my sudden strike, their strength had looked rather thin, for after fusing so many cultivation techniques, I now stood well above other loose cultivators of my rank. After a quick search for silver, I went looking for word of the shallow water gang, uneasy about what I had just bought. That shopkeeper had the face of a man with no credit at all. I found several shelves of documents in one room, flipped by category to the shallow water gang's file, and read it through, and then I paused and took everything I judged useful. Summoning a cabinet from my space grid, I stuffed the thick stack of papers inside, and only then left the place. There was actually a marrow refining realm martial artist among them, and the first version of the information had left him out. He was old, and an old grave injury had dulled his fighting strength, but he was still of the marrow refining realm, and that was another world entirely from the bone forging realm. Walking out of a market, I looked toward the residence of gang leader Seo Jechan, thought a moment, and strode ahead. At gang leader Seo Jechan's residence, Ji Dukbong knelt on the floor with his hands bound behind him, trembling as his fearful eyes swept the hall. He begged to know why they had seized him, swearing he would tell them anything he knew if only they would not harm him. Seo Jechan asked from his high seat where that alchemist was, looking down at him. Ji Daokbong asked what alchemist he meant. All confusion. Seo Jechan kicked him square in the chest, and the breath caught in Ji Daokbong's throat as his whole body slammed into a stone pillar and he spat a mouthful of blood. Seo Jechan said that even at a time like this, he still dared play the fool and waved his men on, telling them to beat him until he was willing to talk. They fell on him with fists and feet, and in moments Ji Daokbong shrieked that he would talk. Seo Jechan told him to speak. Then, a thread of a smile on his lips, Ji Daokbong said low and terrified that he did not know the alchemist either. Each time the man had come to him for a deal, trusting him to sell the pills, and after the day's selling had handed him a little hard-earned coin. The smile drained slowly from Seo Jechan's face. He walked to Ji Daokbong step by step, drew a long sword all at once, and drove it into his thigh. Ji Daokbong let out a great cry, wholly unable to dodge. Seo Jechan said he was not so easily fooled, and told Ji Daokbong to keep spinning the tail and let him see how far it would go. He wrenched the sword in the wound, and in a moment the thigh was a bloody ruin, and Ji Daokbong hurt too much even to scream, only gasping for air. He managed, his voice thin and his face like a corpse's, that everything he had said was true, and told them to go and check it. Seo Jechan turned to his men and asked whether they had found who the old man dealt with. One answered that the old man was very careful, for every time they followed his people they were shaken off, and they still did not know where he lived or whom he had met. Seo Jechan murmured at how careful the old man was, and leaned in and set his foot on the wound and ground it slowly with his soul. The mangled flesh turned worse, fast becoming a pulp, and Ji Daokbong shouted it was true, all of it true, near to blacking out. Seo Jechan told them to force the medicine down him and break his fingers one at a time. His men hauled Ji Daokbong up and poured a bowl of it into his mouth. He had drifted into a daze, but now he snapped clear, and the clarity only let him feel the pain more sharply still. Seo Jechan said he wanted to see how tough the old man's mouth really was, and pointed. Someone brought out a great pair of pliers crusted dark brown, where old blood had dried, a foul reek clinging to them. No telling how much flesh they had already crushed. He said coldly that after 10 fingers there were still 10 toes, then the piercing of the collarbones, then the boiling in water. He had plenty of time to play with the old man slowly. The terror slid off Ji Daokbong's face, and of a sudden he spat a mouthful of bloody phlegm at Seo Jechan and laughed aloud. He roared at them all to come at once, jeering that he wanted to see whether a spineless coward could give an old man a little more comfort than this. Knowing the disguise was useless now, he only laughed the harder. Seo Jechan's eyes narrowed, and in fury he shouted for the torture, that he would see this man kneel and beg for death. His men grabbed for Ji Daokbong's fingers and brought the pliers to bear. An arrow whipped in and struck one of them, its force alone knocking him flat, the pliers falling from his hand with a bright clatter. Everyone froze, and then 2 more arrows flew, taking 2 men through the heart and killing them where they stood. Someone cried out that they were under attack, and they scrambled for cover, but the arrows kept coming. Any head that poked out was pinned through the brow, while those who found no cover in time took a shaft in the body. The ones who returned fire with hidden weapons and arrows each sprouted a new hole a breath later, the shafts driving straight through them. In that short span, more than a dozen men in the hall lay dead. The rest dared not lift their heads, yet some arrows bent by chi curved past the cover and buried themselves anyway. This was archery beyond any ordinary martial artist. One man and one bow holding down dozens on his own. A voice thundered to ask what petty thief dared run wild here, and a figure crossed the distance in a blink to stand above the hall. The shallow water gang men cried out in sudden joy that Elder Ha had come. I stood on the eaves, watching Ha Wanshu vault the wall, turn the bow, and shot down another gang member who had shown his head. Ha Wanshu roared that I would die for my daring, his hair fairly bristling, and thrust out his right hand shaped into an eagle's claw, grabbing for my head. It sliced the air with a shrill cry and caught nothing. My figure drifted back, and 3 more arrows flew out, killing the hidden men one by one, and the shallow water gang, so lifted a moment before by Ha Wanshu's coming, fell abruptly quiet. The bow and my footwork did not foul each other, and my aim held true, so even with Ha Wanshu hounding me from behind, I went on shooting the gangmen below. Slowly some of them broke, unable to bear this dying by inches, and a few leapt out to charge me, only to meet an arrow. For the Yonyu realm men and most of the shallow water gang were only that. My arrows were deaf, and even the bone-forging ones fell after several shots in a row. One whispered near Seo Chen to ask whether this man might be here to save that old one. Seo Chen told him to go take the old one hostage then, and threatened me. The man shrank back and dared say no more, for none of them could so much as show a head without an arrow finding it. Whether I had come to save someone was no longer the point. They could not lift their heads, and even without lifting them, if the cover ran thin, the arrow still came. Seo Chen had not seen archery cultivated to this pitch in many years. Long ago there had been a man in Humbun City they called shooting half the city, and looking now, he had likely stood on a par with me. That man had left the city in the end for higher archery arts elsewhere. Seo Chen did not order his men out to seize Jidokbong, since going out now was simply to die and served no purpose. His eyes ranged the hall and fell on an iron hook trailing an iron chain, a barbed thing meant to run through a man's collarbones, of which his residence never ran short. His look shifted, and he snatched it up and hurled it toward Jidokbong. Whether or not I had come to save the man, it was at least a chance, and he did not mind trying it. My eyes had been sweeping the ground the whole while, and I saw the hook at once. Drawing and loosing were one motion. The arrow caught it in an instant, pinned it, and dashed it to the floor, and a second arced arrow shot towards Seo Jaechun's place. Dirt and stone burst up. Seo Jaechun looked at the shaft still humming beside his foot, his face gone white. It was luck that the cover was broad enough. For shooting blind, I had misjudged the spot by a hair, or the arrow would already have been lodged in his brow. I flashed across and came to a stop before Jidokbong, and looking at the wreck of his body, my face darkened. A little later and, even saved, he would have been left a cripple. He told me to leave quickly, some feeling in his eyes, for coming here alone was too dangerous, too reckless. Seo Jaechun had stared when I appeared out front, and then his heart leapt with joy. From a distance he had no answer for me, and rushing me blindly was a dead road. But now with only a few paces between us, if he could turn aside a single arrow he could close the gap. If he could tangle me up a moment, he could drag it out until Ha Wanshu arrived. If I dared flee, he would move to kill Jidokbong on the ground, and in that fear of acting rashly my judgment would surely falter. He crowed to himself that it was almost too easy, that I was simply a fool. But even as the thought ran through him, he saw me draw the bow, and I sent the arrow at Ha Wanshu first and paid his side no mind at all. Seo Jaechun snarled that I was seeking death, a cold and vicious light in his eyes at being ignored, and his figure flashed to me, a great saber sweeping toward my neck. My face did not stir, and I loosed the Cheongsim technique all at once. Everything around me seemed to pause. My eyes darted about, and all the information flooded into my mind. Ha Wanshu was batting the arrows aside with his eagle claws, but under the force his body had checked a moment and lost its forward drive. In the corners of the hall, 5 or 6 men still hid, breathing fast with fear, and though they fought to smother it, their places came clear to me all the same. Seo Jaechun's face was savage, his eyes bloodshot with excitement, the veins on the hand that held the saber standing out from the strain. His men behind him wavered over whether to rush in and help take me, struggle plain on their faces. The next moment the world took up its turning again, and my face went naturally calm. My left hand let the bow and arrow fall, and a long sword hung in my right where none had been an instant before. The fire-patterned sword unfolded and tapped the edge of Seo Jaechun's saber. A sharp clash rang out. I had used only the tip, yet in that moment he could not keep his grip on the saber, as though he had thrown his strength the wrong way. To press on would snap his own wrist. He had practiced the saber over a decade. No master of the blade way, perhaps, but a man who would never misapply his force, and yet just now he had. Seo Jaechun was a ruthless one. Knowing the moment was dire, he risked ruining his wrist, gripped the handle hard, and drove the blade on toward me. But it was forced, his once fluid saber snagging on the hitch, its strength and its aim now far from what they had been. Before the blade could touch me, a flash of white light crossed his eyes, and a long sword stabbed at his throat from an impossible angle. His eyes flew wide and he wanted to fall back, but his body had already spent its full strength going forward. The two opposing forces locked him stiff as he watched the blade pass through his neck. I drew the sword back. A thin crack opened across his throat, and his own muscles clamped instinctively to pinch the wound, so that only a trickle of blood ran free. He stared at me blankly, disbelief in his eyes, and terror under it. Ha Wanshu cried out for Jei-chen from the distance, badly shaken, for if something happened to Seo Jei-chen, his own fate would hardly be better. My strike had come so fast he did not yet know how grave the wound was. He crossed the last steps to me and reached out his right hand to seize me. 3 Immortals sword, with my body wholly my own. The long sword thrust out 3 sword lights that fused as one in the space of a heartbeat and slammed into Ha Wanshu's palm. It rang like plain metal on metal. His eagle claws had long since been tempered proof against water and fire. Though the 3 Immortals sword was no weak thing, it left only a hole in his right palm and did not sink deep. Its impact was enough to push him back a single step, a step he chose to take himself. The power of that sword had put a scare in him, and he feared what I might follow it with. But that worry soon fell away. A gulf of realms could not be bridged by the fire pattern sword alone, not unless it were the whole So-Non sword, and not the single move. Immortal points the way. Leaning on the Cheongsim technique to command my body, Ha Wanshu and I stood evenly matched for now, but in force or in stamina, dragged out long enough, the one to break in the end would surely be me. Another clash, and I floated back with the force to come to rest near Seo Jei-chen, whose eyes were wide and who had not moved a hair from then till now. It was not that he would not, but that he could not. If he dared to move, the wound on his neck would split open on the instant, and he would die. No other end to it. Ha Wanshu roared at my daring, and charged. In my eyes, his movements laid themselves bare. Anxious over Seo Jei-chen, he was plainly overreaching. His eagle claw technique, once balanced between tension and ease, now all imposing show, though in my sight it was nothing of the kind. Sometimes more force is not the better way, and it is the mastering of the measure that matters most. I stepped back on my right foot, and a flash of sword light lit in his eyes. This move again, he thought, for he had guarded in his heart against the 3 Immortals sword, and to see it come again with no other move behind it gave him a thread of relief. Extraordinary as the technique was, it was after all a single strike, and once seen a man would guard against it. To think one move could conquer all was to ask far too much of it. The sound of a blade parting skin and flesh and bone rang out. My long sword, with the momentum of splitting bamboo, drove straight through his eagle claws and onto his armpit. Sword 5. Having reached the bone-forging realm under the Cheongsim technique and built upon immortal points the way, I had stacked 5 sword strikes purely in force and speed. The extreme impact broke through palms hard as metal. Ha Wanshu looked at his arm in disbelief. It was so nearly the same sword art, so how could the gulf between the one and the other be so vast? His mouth worked as he tried to speak, but I gave him no chance, sweeping the sword across his neck, and his head flew up, his eyes full of disbelief and grievance. I caught my breath and went to help Ji Dukbong up, glancing at Seo Jei-chen still standing there, and I looked at Ji Dukbong. He said there was no need, knowing I had asked whether he wished to take the vengeance himself, but he could already see that Seo Jei-chen wished only for death now, seeming to keep a chance at life, his whole neck poised in a delicate balance, past all saving. The state of it was a torment as sharp as the tortures he had once dealt others. The reckoning come round to him at last. I nodded, but did not leave at once. I picked up the longbow from the floor, and as my figure flickered, I drew it 6 times in a breath, the arrows flying to every quarter of the hall. Screams rang out. Not one fish slipped the net, and but for Seo Jei-chen still on his feet, every last man went down under a shaft. Before I left, I searched Ha Wanshu's clothes, and found no cultivation technique manuals, only some silver notes and loose silver, which left me somewhat let down. As for Seo Jei-chen, in his own mansion and wearing a single garment, one look told me he carried nothing. Given the time, I would not have minded stripping the place, but it was too dangerous, for the racket here had not been small and people would be arriving soon. There was no need to run such a risk. I brought Ji Dukbong back to another rented courtyard, for we had taken 2 such places in Gyeongbun City. I fetched injury medicine from the space grid and worked it into him, and but for the grave wound in his thigh, the rest were mostly flesh cuts that a spell of rest would mend. He said, drawing breath, his voice heavy, that we must leave Gyeongbun City at once, for it was no longer safe. I agreed that it was not safe. I had asked in the market earlier, and 2 days from now a caravan would leave the city. So we would slip out first, wait the 2 days, and find a chance to join it midway and make for So-Non City. The head of the shallow water gang was dead, so in theory the trouble should not run deep. But by the file I had taken, Seo Jei-chen's father, Seo Mangriang, was an expert of the organ refining realm and a man of great weight throughout Hyunbun City. It was on Seo Mangryang's strength that Seo Jechen had raised the Shallow Water Gang at all. With a mere bone-forging cultivation, building a gang of any standing in Hyunbun City was flatly impossible. Nor would a marrow-refining hand like Ha Wanchu have held a post there. And it was not Seo Mangryang alone, for I had also torn apart an information network with a backer of its own behind it. Any way you turned it, escaping Hyunbun City quickly was the first order of business for us both. Ji Dokbong listened and knit his brows hard. He said that leaving the city was no trouble, but joining that caravan would likely be hard. The caravan might quietly send word into Hyunbun City, and then there would be either pursuers waiting or the caravan itself holding us first. My expression shifted, and I understood the crux of it at once. With Seo Mangryang's power in Hyunbun City, he would hunt the two of us on a wide net. For us to simply board a caravan and leave unscathed was not quite a daydream, but a fearfully risky one. To be drifting outside the city from now on would be the most conspicuous thing of all, marking us as trouble at a glance. We both fell silent and began turning over what ways there might be. I looked up of a sudden and said it seemed we might not have to leave Hyunbun City at all. Both of us wore the disguise was good. To certain eyes it stood out glaringly. So I asked what would happen if we simply wore our own true faces in Hyunbun City. Ji Delpong was taken aback, then caught it in a breath. The disguise technique had its uses, but during a citywide manhunt it turned conspicuous instead, wearing the look of a man with something buried to hide. Our own faces would set our hearts at ease. There were already crowds of people come in from outside Hyunbun City, and with everyone waiting on the Sonon caravan, the number of outsiders staying in the city just now was staggering. Seo Mangryang and his people simply had not the strength to search so many, and could not manage it if they tried. This was the darkness that lies right beneath the lamp. At gang leader Seo Jechen's mansion, several figures dropped in over the outer wall, and the scene in the courtyard changed all their faces. When they saw Seo Jechen still standing there safe, they could not help a breath of relief. One said the young master was fine, and told the others to notify the master quickly. One left, and the others came attentively to Seo Jechen's side, ringing him and watching all around with wary eyes. Seeing no further danger, one of them looked closer and found Seo Jechen's eyes dull, wholly bloodshot, his breath so faint it was scarcely there. A breeze drifted past, and a gush of blood sprayed of a sudden from his neck and drenched the men around him. Within the high-walled compound of the Seo family, the guards stood on sharp alert, the air heavy and grave. In the main hall, the corpse of gang leader Seo Jechen lay in its coffin, and Seo Mangryang stood at its side, his face dark as he studied the wound on his son's neck. He said through his teeth what a fast sword it had been, what a ruthless sword, and the temperature in the hall seemed to fall. The maids and servants held their breath, terrified of drawing his anger now. The mother of Seo Jechen wailed for the master to avenge her son, her voice hoarse and cutting at the ears. Seo Mangryang said that whoever had killed his child would not escape, and turned to his steward. The steward hurried forward and murmured that he had already given orders, that everyone who had held a grudge against the young master was being checked for his whereabouts that day. Any whose movements were suspect would be seized at once. Seo Mangryang slapped him across the cheek, and the man crashed into a pillar and spat blood, staring in horror, not knowing his fault. While the servants shuddered and bowed their heads lower, Seo Mangryang said gloomily that anyone who had ever borne his son a grudge was to be taken and questioned first, whether or not their movements that day were suspect. Anyone loitering near the young master's residence that day was to be taken as well. He would sooner kill an innocent by mistake than let one suspect slip, and he demanded to know whether the steward understood. The steward stammered his assent, scrambling up and running off with a hand to his swelling cheek. Seo Mangryang turned on the servants and said the young master was dead, and none of them seemed the least bit grieved. They jumped as one wails breaking out through the hall and carrying past the walls of the residence. In an alley off a Hyunbun City street, a voice fumed at the gall of someone wrecking his shop. A man reported that everyone inside was dead, all killed by a single sword stroke. The boss asked whether he could tell anything from it. The traces were wiped clean, the man said. So for now nothing, but he had heard gang leader Seo Jechen had died that day as well, of sword wounds, and Ha Wanchu with him. The boss said that was interesting. The man asked what they should do. He said to investigate, for if their shop was smashed like this and they made no answer, others would think them easy to bully. The man said he understood, and went to see to it at once. The whole of Hyunbun City seemed to draw tight in a breath. Searches and arrests began, and those with their ear to the ground hurried home to hide rather than be caught in the sweep. Cries and the sounds of fighting rose here and there and were quickly put down. The other prominent families of Hyunbun City tacitly let Seo Mangryang have his way, for he had lost his most cherished son. Any who stepped out to stop him now would surely earn his enmity, and Seo Mangriang was famed in the city for nursing a grudge. So even a misunderstanding smoothed over today might end one day with a knife in the back. Some families were not afraid, but they had no wish to invite the trouble. By the second day, the Seo family began sifting the outsiders of Hyungbun City, and anyone found using a disguise technique was arrested and put to the question. To dare wear a disguise meant you had something to hide, and having something to hide, you could go and explain yourself properly in the Seo family dungeon. But there were simply too many outsiders in the city, too hard to check one by one, and sure to make too many enemies. Not all of them were easy marks, and no few were true experts. So after only 2 days, the wide sweep slowly stalled, though the investigating went on, only no longer so brazenly. At the same time, those meaning to leave the city and the merchant caravans became the chief targets of the searches. The caravans were told that if they found any suspicious soul joining them along the road, they could come back to claim a heavy bounty. Hyungbun City had not known such chaos in years, and the fear spread wide. The streets and the eating houses grown far emptier than before. At the Seo family residence, Seo Mangriang turned to O Jangria and asked whether the killer was among these people. O Jangria was a retainer of the Jian family, sent in particular to help Seo Mangriang. His cultivation was middling, past 50, and only in recent years stumbled somehow into the bone-forging realm. Yet within the Jian family, his standing matched that of an average marrow-refining martial artist, and this only because he had one special skill, that he could command certain goo insects. The kinds of goo ran strange and uncanny, and among them was one that could find a person by the scent of blood. The Jian family and the Seo family were on middling terms, but because Seo Mangriang had thrown Hyungbun City into such an uproar, the Jian family had loosed O Jangria to act and keep the thing from spilling wider. Hearing the question, O Jangria did not answer at once, but kept his eyes fixed on a winged goo insect in his hand, which circled in his palm with no mind to fly off. He said at last with a shake of his head that it was not among these people. Many in the dungeon had already been tortured past recognition, some gravely hurt and near death. Having caught the talk between Seo Mangriang and the retainer, they grasped the rough shape of it. So at O Jangria's words, some could not help weeping for joy, thinking they might finally leave this place. Seo Mangriang said they all seemed very happy. Already sour with disappointment, the change in the dungeon faces stoked his fury higher, for he had lost a son and these people dared be glad now. Their throats seemed to close, and they made no further sound. Seo Mangriang said there were surely still some accomplices among them, and told his men to question the prisoners properly again, and to kill those who ought to be killed. He threw the words out and turned to leave the dungeon, and O Jangria pulled in his neck and hurried after. He had heard before that Seo Mangriang was moody and unaccountable, and now he had seen it for himself, and truly those people in the dungeon were unlucky to have crossed him. It could only be said that in this world, to live well, sometimes not making trouble is not enough. Seo Mangriang asked whether Retainer O could track the man who had killed his son. In the main hall, he sat on the high chair and looked down at O Jangria. Though he set no deliberate weight on the man, it still drew O Jangria's body taut. Without his willing it, O Jangria said low that if that person had not yet left Hyungbun City, he could try. Seo Mangriang said he must trouble Retainer. Oh then, the corner of his mouth twitching faintly. O Jangria said he dared not, waving his hand quickly. He glanced at the goo insect in his sleeve, drew from his pocket a piece of black soil the size of a fingernail, and held it to the insect's mouth with a pained look. The goo insect leapt and lit on the black soil, and in a few breaths the soil was eaten clean. Its wings shivered, and it began to fly forward. Half an hour earlier, this goo insect had licked at Seo Jechun's blood, so the scent it hunted now was that same one. The sword that had done the killing carried the very same scent still. The winged goo insect had lapped at the dead man's blood, and now it shivered its wings and flew forward. Oh, Jangria trailed after it with Seo Mangriang close at his shoulder. 2 marrow-refining retainers of the Seo family came behind, braced to fall on the killer the instant he showed his face. The goo held the pace of a running man. After a quarter of an hour, it drew up before a plain residential courtyard and made to dart inside. Oh, Jangria threw out a hand to shield the creature, and turned back to Seo Mangriang. His master was already reading the yard with narrowed eyes. He heard nothing within. When his figure flickered up onto the wall, the place proved empty, so his retainers dropped into the yard and kicked in the door. The rooms had been swept bare, as though no one had ever lived there. Oh, Jangria stepped in once the danger was ruled out and pointed to where the blade's scent hung thickest. The sword had lingered there a good while, he said. Seo Mangriang ordered the property agent fetched, and the man came white to the lips. Everyone in Hyungbun City had heard by now what the Seo family was chasing. Asked who had rented the yard, the agent's memory served him even through his terror. He laid out the tenant's face in full detail. Oh, Jangria kept still at the side, guessing they would turn up no one this way, the face almost certainly a disguise. Seo Mangriang knew it as well. only he would let no thread slip past him. After the agent had gone, the retainer offered that the one bright spot was that the weapon had not been thrown away. So long as its owner had not quit Hyungbun City, they could still drag him into the light. Seo Mangriang thanked him stiffly, and the retainer bowed and fawned that it was only right. Then he whistled the yard once and flew out, and in no time led them to a second courtyard, as empty as the first. The scent there had gone 2 days stale. This thief kept his burrows like a cunning rabbit, and the words ground out between Seo Mangriang's teeth as his temper climbed. The Gu let out a long cry, and Ojangri's face lit. A scent 2 days old meant the man had likely not yet left the city. At the third courtyard, the Gu circled and would not fly out. Ojangri's expression changed, and he chirred at it in a strange, insect-like call. The creature answered a few times, and his brow nodded, for its wit was small and he could trade only the simplest meaning with it. This was the last place its nose could follow the blade, it told him. Beyond here, the sword had simply vanished. Seo Mangriang's face went dark enough to wring water from, and he demanded to know what was going on. Jangrie could only say haltingly that the sword seemed to have disappeared. He hardly believed his own words, yet it was what the Gu had given him. In a courtyard not far off, I stood swinging a tree branch, running through my sword forms in the plainest way. The blade and the longbow had long since gone into my space grid. The sword was the likeliest thing the Seo family had marked, and I would not throw it away and raise the odds they tracked me. Melting it down meant trusting some blacksmith not to report me, a loss that outweighed the gain, so into the grid it went instead. The grid froze the very hours on a steamed bun. I simply did not believe the Seo family owned any trick that could reach past its walls. To be safe, I had slipped off to another yard after pulling Jideokbong out of the fire, sorted everything inside the grid, and only then come back here. I kept off my alchemy and wore the face of an ordinary martial artist. The Seo family search squad had come by the day before, and 1 of silver had sent them off content. Theirs was a fat posting, a few coins from each household adding up to a fortune, so the searching was a formality. They never once dreamed of catching a man this way. I turned the branch in my hand and let that day's fight run again behind my eyes. Sword 5 could cripple or kill a man in the marrow refining realm head-on. Only Hawanshu had been a thin sort of expert. Over these last days, I had weighed every gain and loss of that fight while I sorted my techniques, since only a true struggle over life and death showed a man where his cracks ran. A branch was a poor teacher, but at least it never bled. The gate creaked open and Ji Dukbong came in off the street, his injuries long healed, his brow furrowed. He had taken to gathering scraps of news whenever he went out for food. Today his voice dropped low as he said Pyongyang County had fallen. I had braced for it long ago, and still the confirmation set something turning in me. I asked how he knew, whether someone had run from Pyongyang County to Hyungbun City. He nodded, set the food on the stone table, poured 2 cups, drank one himself, and let a long breath go. I took a chair and drank with him. I could not stand against even a slightly stronger strangeness, let alone a ruin on that scale. Knowing 100 things changed nothing when I had not the strength to touch one of them. That was the grief of the weak, and the plain lot of most people alive in this world. Loosened by the wine, Ji Deokbong murmured an old verse about willow catkins scenting a shop, and a parting sorrow longer than the Eastwood River. Then, his cup never stopping, he began to tell me his story. It was a common tale with no knots or turns in it, only a young man who had wanted to taste the wide martial world. I listened close all the way through, until he laughed himself hoarse and slumped onto the table. 5 days slipped past, the city still churning, and the Seo family still hunting. Then the Sonun caravan rolled into Hyungbun City. 1,001 ahead, Ji Dokbong told me, and I could hardly credit it. The caravan could plainly have taken whatever it wanted by force, and yet in the end it traded safe passage for nothing more than a ticket and a price. In the end, the 2 of us decided to follow the Seonun caravan, for no grander reason than safety. The strangest on the road into Hyungbun City had cut too deep, and I had no wish to meet its like again. A single red candle had cost 1,001 on that trip. If we tied ourselves to some small caravan and were forced to burn one, the loss would run worse still. The Sinun caravan knew its own worth to the copper, which was exactly why it dared name such a price. When we reached the caravan station, it was already thick with people. Most were there to trade, only a small share meaning to travel along, though even that share ran near 100. They had already pulled in 100,001, I said, and could not keep the envy from my voice. I could refine Jangbu pill now, and my earnings looked healthy enough, yet saving a sum like that would take months I could ill afford. An income that fat would only whistle up trouble of its own. To have money sitting there for the making, and force yourself to leave it lie, was a hard thing to swallow. Ji Dokbong sighed that the caravan would not leave for 3 days yet, so it was more than 100,000. He loved silver as much as any man, but set beside the Seonun caravan he lacked even the standing to be measured. At the paying place, the caravan man glanced at us, took the silver and counted it. He asked nothing of our names or where we hailed from, since none of that mattered to them. He handed over a token and said they would set out at the dragon hour 3 days on, would wait for no straggler, and knew the token and not the face. I cupped my hands in thanks and studied the cloud pattern worked into the wood. Forging it looked easy, though they had likely mixed in some mark only they could read. In any case, few men had the nerve to thumb a false token, since being caught would cost a layer of skin at best and a life at worst. We turned to go. Humbun City, roused by the caravan's coming, had thrown off its hush and filled its streets again. A figure in too great a hurry slammed into me, and I slid aside and clamped his wrist. The thief went white and begged me to let go, twisting hard, but his arm sat in my grip, as if caught between a pair of pliers. I told COU that a man who meant to steal ought first to learn whom he was stealing from. Then I flung him down so his head struck the ground and bled. Knowing he had crossed the wrong man, the thief swallowed his cry, scrambled up, and vanished into the crowd. He had spotted our token, Ji Dokbong said, shaking his head with a smile. The Sonun caravan knew the token and not the man, and one such token was worth 1,000 won on its own. Even unused, it would fetch a few hundred resold, near pure profit. Then Humbun City would see no shortage of thieving in the coming days, I answered. Some martial artists would simply lean on their strength and take a token by force or open robbery. We walked the streets a while and laid in a great store of supplies, since the road to Sonun City ran more than 10 days and the caravan sold passage, not food. After a few turns through the alleys to shed the eyes on us, we came back to our yard. At the Gaixian restaurant, Seo Mangriang lifted his cup first and called it a great honor to have drawn Supervisor Donglu to his table. Donglu wore the cool keep-your-distance air of a man there only because a friend had pressed the errand on him. The caravan had business waiting, he said, so Seo Mangriang should speak his piece plainly. He had heard already what had lately befallen the Seo family, and had no appetite for meddling in another man's affairs. Seo Mangriang did not bridle at the coolness. He drew a stack of banknotes from his robe, set it down, and slid it across. His son had been killed, he said, the grudge past squaring, and he boldly begged a favor. Donglu's eyes went to the notes without his willing them. Each was 1,000 won bill, and the stack ran no less than 10,000 won, a gift open-handed enough to soften his face by a fair measure. The caravan pulled in 100,000 won and more across 3 days, true, but that silver belonged to the caravan. Supervisor though he was, Dongyu saw none of it, while these 10,000 might soon be his own. He said he had heard of the son's death. Only the thief was cunning and had gone unfound so many days that he could not think where to lay hold of the matter, even wishing to. Seo Mangriang said the thief was surely still in the city, waiting his chance to slip away, and that with the range close enough he now had a means to find the man. So 3 days hence, he hoped the supervisor might let him hold the caravan a short while and hunt his quarry among it. A smaller caravan would have posed no such trouble, since his own strength was enough to lean on lesser outfits. But the Seonin caravan he could neither cow nor dared to try, and so he had only his connections left to spend. Those people 3 days on had all paid their silver, Dongyu said, frowning, and doing this put him in a hard place. 1,000 won ahead was steep enough, but safety came near guaranteed, so the caravan took it with a clear conscience. To turn around and sell the passengers a second time sat too ugly for a man who could not lightly gnaw at the caravan's good name. Seo Mangriang begged his understanding and laid down a second stack, another 10,000, 20,000 now in all. Earning that honestly would cost Dongui a long stretch of work, and it would be his the moment he nodded. He wrestled with himself, hesitated, and in the end still shook his head, saying he feared the favor would draw talk too easily. Seo Mangriang answered that he knew the caravan's men had labored hard of late, and that he had no other token of thanks, and hoped this might stand them to a few drinks. He set down a third 10,000, then 5,000 more beside it. That last 5,000, he said, was his apology to those whose time he would waste while they waited out the search. Dong Yu protested that he could not possibly, shaking his head, though his hands were not slow, and the 35,000 won went swiftly into his sleeve. Seo Mangriang thanked him, and a smile broke loose on his face at last. It was only right, Dongyu laughed. A scoundrel who had killed a man's son was a villain through and through, and if such a creature had burrowed into the caravan it would be a calamity. Ferreting him out early left the supervisor the one owing thanks. Seo Mangriang waved the words off, poured him a cup of Gaixian wine and pressed him to enjoy it, and after 3 rounds took his leave. The smile fell from Dongyu's face the instant the door closed, and he called his men in. 3 days on, he told them Seo Mangriang would come searching, and when he did, they were to take this 1,000 won and share it among the passengers as a token of apology. His man fawned that the supervisor was benevolent, and Dong Nui said he wished to hear no idle gossip after, then waved him out. 3 days went by. The Seo family called off its citywide sweep, to all appearances giving the thing up, and the two of us kept to our yard. Ji-Dokbong seized the chance to mend himself, freshly hurt as he was with a long road ahead. I seized every hour I had to cultivate. First, the proficiency of my inner energy technique, the Kyungtan art, reached great perfection at last. It was not only that the internal energy it drew ran richer now. The greater gift was that the count of medicinal pills I could take in a day climbed to a new rung. Before I broke into the bone forging realm, I could stomach 4 Jangbu pill a day. And after breaking through, 5. Now, with the Gyeongtan art at great perfection, my daily ceiling had leapt to 7. The Jangbu pill bit a touch shallower since I reached bone forging, yet 7 a day laid over the technique's bonus was another thing entirely. By my own reckoning, the 100,000 progress points to the marrow refining realm would take only a year and a half to fill. That was the change a fine technique worked. To touch marrow refining in a year and a half was more than a loose cultivator could dream. Most martial artists, hemmed in by talent and by their techniques, never reached that realm in a whole life. Those who did were already old, like Ha Wanshu at 50, barely scraping across the line. The price of my speed was the ruinous cost of the pills. 7 Jangbu pill ran past 201 a day, and better than 70,000 won across a year, far beyond any purse a loose cultivator could fill. Only a man like me, refining his own, could stay supplied and even turn a heavy profit besides. When I was not cultivating, I read through books of medicinal herbs, meaning to work backward toward the formula for the Biryong pill. It was the strongest medicine of the 5 body refining stages, sold in only a handful of Gyeongbun city shops. Its formula was past price, and its refining so hard that many who could turn out Jangbu pill could not so much as begin on it. That was why it fetched 101 a pill, fully 3 times a Jangbu pill. This time I held no worn remnant formula, so I studied the herbs themselves, since the better I knew their properties, the higher my odds when I tried to deduce it. Even should the Biryong pill stay out of reach, a deeper grasp of the herbs would let me blend other pills outright. Reading never did a man any harm, and there were even hours when the learning was its own quiet pleasure. Early one morning, the Seonun caravan station already roared with noise. Loose cultivators shouldering bags large and small, every one of them ticketed. The caravan sold no food, but it lent carriages at least, and cramped as they were, a man who could bear the crush would reach Seonun City in the end. I stood in the press, listening to the chatter around me, when the whole caravan fell silent at once. I turned, my eyes narrowing without my willing it, and traded a glance with Ji-Dokbong at my side. The caravan's manager Dong-U had come, and beside him walked Seo Mangriang and Oh Jangrie. The caravan offered its convenience to honest folk and not to the wicked, Dong-U called out. A man's son had been murdered, and they had come now to look into it, which would cost everyone a little time he trusted they would forgive. The travelers eyed one another, uneasy, but under another man's roof they might resent it, and dared not speak. Then a scatter of voices broke from the crowd, 20 or so, urging the search on, saying none of them could sleep easy beside a killer. The planted shouts thinned the resistance in the rest. A smile touched Dong-Yu's mouth as he looked to Seo Mangriang, who signed to Oh Jangrie, and the retainer dared not dawdle and drew his goo from his robe. A blood-tasting goo, Ji-Dokbong breathed, his pupils shrinking. He held himself back from so much as a glance my way, too plain to tell in a crowd, though his heart was clearly hammering. From his whisper and the murmurs around us, I pieced together the insect's trick. It could hunt the scent of blood left on a weapon, and I marveled at it even as I blessed the choice I had already made. Feeling the fright come off Ji-Dokbong, I stirred one finger and sent a thread of internal energy to tap his sleeve, the old signal we had agreed on. He startled, then steadied. The goo circled in the air a while with no mind to fly at the crowd, only hissing back at Oh Jangrie, whose face changed at the sound. He stole a look at Seo Mangriang, swallowed, and began to lead the insect down the line of loose cultivators one by one. Its shape was an eerie thing, and more than a few men frowned as it drifted past them. Oh Jangrie had walked it past half the line while it stayed perfectly calm, the sweat standing out on his brow. Seo Mangriang narrowed his eyes from across the yard. Ji-Dokbong feigned ease, though he was strung tight within, and the grid held my blade, and the grid told no one anything. A moment more, and the goo had cleared the whole line. Oh Jangrie came back to Seo Mangriang and shook his head. Seo Mangriang looked over the cultivators with a face like thunder, some formless certainty in him that his son's killer stood among these very people, and no way at all to pick the man out. His fists nodded, and in the end they had to open. They would move out in a quarter of an hour, Dong-U announced, and thanked everyone for their trouble, and turned to Seo Mangriang, for this was the whole of the favor he could do. I watched Xiaomangriang's back, and a small smile found its way onto my face. A quarter of an hour later, the Sionan caravan rolled out. I settled into the corner of a carriage. An old man across from me was asking whether we were all bound for the Sonan sword sect, and whether it was truly so easy a place to enter. His words dropped the carriage into quiet. The Sonan sword sect was the first among all schools for thousands of miles. Its strength passed all sounding, and Sonan City itself had swelled into a giant on the back of that sect. Not a young man in the carriage had grown up without the legends in his ears, and every one of them ached toward the place. The old man smiled a bitter smile. He had lived a few years in Sionan City in his youth, he said, and the life there had not come easy, so he had gone out to wander. Now, with war and chaos everywhere in these broken times, he had thought it over and chosen to go back and see out his last years. Someone begged him to tell of the sect, to say whether it was strict in taking disciples. For the born geniuses, it could hardly be called strict, the old man answered, but for ordinary men, it sat well out of reach. Joining turned on age, on bone structure, and on comprehension ability. I drew a flask of wine from behind me and passed it across, and his eyes brightened the moment he sniffed it. He laughed that I was too kind, took a long glad pull, and said that since we were willing to listen, he would spend a few more words. We could learn all of it easily enough once we reached the city. Age came first, he said, savoring the room's attention. A man had to be under 15, and if older, no more than 20, and standing at the marrow refining realm on top of it. The carriage cried out as one at a marrow refining cultivator under 20. Even in a place like Hyungbun City, such a man was a marked expert and an honored guest wherever he went. Most marrow refining martial artists there were past 40, and one in his 30s counted as rarely gifted, with the organ refining realm someday within reach. My own face shifted a little, for this body of mine was already 23 years old. A farm villager once, driven into Pyeongjim County for a living when the land could no longer feed him. If the bone structure and comprehension ability ran high enough, someone pressed, could the age bar be set aside? The old man nodded that it could, then turned the words on their head. For a man whose bones and comprehension ran that high, reaching marrow refining before 20 was no great feat to begin with. The carriage fell mute. Of course, he allowed. Some came to the Marshall Road late and lagged a little through no fault of talent. So the sect left them a door, a test they might pass to earn their place. What that test was he could not say, for much of what he knew was hearsay, and we could ask at the sect's own gate. I asked whether it took disciples on a set day, and he said once a month since so many wished to enter that the sect had to keep the room to draw in new blood. I stopped asking and shut my eyes to doze. My age ran past the line, and of this body's bone structure the less said the better, since its first owner had not so much as budged his cultivation in 3 whole months. That left only comprehension ability. Mine, propped on the simplifying panel, had grown into something past belief, though whether that one strength could outweigh the 2 strikes against me I truly could not say. The old man, seeing the young faces fall, offered some comfort. There was no need to fix on the Sonan sword sect alone, he said, since many other schools around Sonan City took disciples and their legacies were nothing weak. He spoke true, for the sect's own pull had drawn a crowd of down-on-their-luck schools to root near the city, legacies that would have shown anywhere else. The carriage went silent, and as we drew away from Hyungbun City the road roughened, and the ride began to jolt. The whole day the caravan passed easy and untroubled. No mountain bandit was fool enough to try the Sonan caravan's name and strength. Strangeness there was aplenty in the wilds, but not so thick that a man met it at every turn. This road the caravan ran often, so any true anomaly had long been cleared or gone around. I spent most of the hours reading medical books, having little else to do, and found I had come to like it. The slow learning of what each herb could do. What had begun as a means to deduce the biryong pill had quietly become its own end. There are times learning truly does gladden a man, most of all when it hands him the very knowledge he needs. On the evening of the 7th day, a man in the carriage cried out that there were people living out here. Curious, we drew the curtain back, and sure enough, a lone thatched cottage sat in a fold of the mountains, no city anywhere near it. One hut alone in the whole hollow was strange however you looked at it. The old man's face changed of a sudden, and he shouted for everyone to get back inside and not to look. Before he could explain, another man said, delighted, that the door had opened, that there was a bride. We all turned our heads by instinct to see the cottage door swing wide and a figure in a phoenix coronet and ceremonial robes come slowly out. Someone murmured that she was so beautiful, his face gone blank, and then he lifted his hands to his own cheeks and drove his fingers savagely toward his eyes. A sound like a great bell rang out from the heart of the Sonan caravan and washed through the whole train in an instant. Heads cleared, the dazed looks wiped away at a stroke, and then the cries began, men clutching at their own eyeballs, some a hair's breadth from tearing them loose. In our carriage, many already had their hands pressed to their eyes. It was only the old man's warning a breath before that had dragged their reactions a beat slow. and that beat was enough to save the eyes in their heads. Someone stammered to know what was happening, shivering with the horror of having been worked like a puppet. Worst of all, none of them could now recall what they had seen. There had been a thatched cottage, it seemed, and past that, nothing. Cries kept lifting from the other carriages, while the caravan's guards moved down the line to check each one, warning us all to keep our eyes off whatever lay outside. That had been a supernatural entity, the old man sighed. A thatched hut sprung up in a mountain call being trouble past doubt. The surest guard against such a thing was to neither look nor listen, for under the Sionan caravan's protection safety mostly held. We thanked him, and he waved it off, since he had saved his own skin as much as ours. Had a man been truly charmed, gouging out his eyes would have been only the first step, with far worse to break loose in the carriage after. I sat in the corner with my brows drawn tight. When the others stared at the cottage, I had not looked at all, having met these entities enough to have made a firm rule of it. Yet the instant a man clawed at his own eyes, my mind still went dim, and though the Cheongsin technique caught and turned of itself, it did not sweep the strangeness off at once. So whether a man looked or not, the thing still reached him. Only the depth of it differed. The sliver of the bone-attaching curse I kept on my arm had stirred only faintly, and laid at that, a mark that lagged a step behind the danger. That was its own small wonder. I glanced at the old man, certain now he carried something that held such entities off, since he alone had gone untouched. My Cheongsin technique worked, yet against a stronger entity it plainly could not hold, which was fair enough for a common technique. Ji Dokbong murmured his thanks to whatever luck had put us on the Sonon caravan. The entity had only lately surfaced, he guessed, or even the caravan would not have been caught so flat and nearly overturned. Had we trailed some smaller outfit, whether we cleared this at all would have come down to a throw of luck. The Sionan caravan swung wide of the mountain call, looped well around it, and came back to the road. Shaken by the thing, it seemed to quicken its pace, where before it had let people down to rest 3 or 4 times a day, it now cut that to twice, each halt short, the wheels turning again at once. The 8th day and the 9th blinked past, and one evening a cheer went up through the whole train, for they had sighted Sonun City. This was not Sonun City yet, the old man said, only a small city beside it, with a full day's road still to the true one. A smile sat on his face all the same, since to reach even here was to be all but safe. The memory of the entity was still too fresh in him, and only a city could give a man any ease. Half an hour more and the caravan passed into the small city. Some travelers peeled away, not all of them bound for the main city, but my road ran on. The Sionan sword sect stood near the main city, and that was where most were headed. The caravan rested there a day, and I took the time to walk the streets. The place had a plain vitality to it, its wine houses and pleasure quarters alone far outnumbering Hyungbun cities. The prices of pills and weapons had dropped a fair way besides, since only a crowd this thick could press such wares so low. Marrow refining martial artists, a rare sight in Yongbun City, were not quite everywhere here, but I marked a good few on a single street. I thought of the Sonon sword sect's demand for marrow refining under 20, and felt quiet inside, since only a cultivation ground like this could let a sect set such a bar. My mind went back to Pyeongjim County, and the rebels who had come after. That army only one small branch among many, its plundering aimed at little counties like Pyeongjim. Turning it over now, I saw how much must have gone wrong in this dynasty for a rebel force of that size to run wild. A broken and bleeding age. Early the next morning the caravan set out again, the old man already gone. The main city was richer, he had said, but its living pressed harder, and a quiet outlying city suited a man who had no thought of the sect at his age. At a rest I asked Ji Dokbong whether we should rent a yard in the city and keep on selling medicinal pills. I meant to sell either way, since the silver came fast, and I was counting on it to save. Only I would go more carefully this time. Best of all would be to join the Sionan sword sect and let its name shield the trade, for the Jangbu pill ran hot elsewhere and was likely no better than middling here. Ji Dokbong said with a smile that of course we would keep selling. No sect would take a man his age, and if my pill trade went well he would want for neither food nor clothes. By evening I saw Sionan City, and the first sight of it stopped me where I stood. I had never dreamed this world could hold a city so vast and so high, a thing raised by human hands that seemed past all raising. The guards at the gate stood at the bone-forging realm to a man, their squad leader above marrow refining, his exact realm past even the Cheongsin technique's reading. Their air ran cold and hard, men with no little blood behind them. We took our leave of the others in the carriage, and found an inn, dear in its price and its food both, though we had steeled ourselves for that beforehand. I said the next morning it was 2,001 a year, when the agent brought us to a courtyard we liked in every part but the price. I had thought to do as before and keep 3 burrows like a cunning rabbit, and saw at once there was no keeping 3 of anything here. Living in a big city was not easy, truly not easy. It was not that he would not give a discount, the agent said with a smile. Only, too many people were pouring into Seonun City of late, and if we waited a few more days, this courtyard would already be gone. In the end, I took it. The rent pushed down to 1901 a year, no lower however hard Ji Deokbong haggled. Once we had bought some simple furniture, the two of us moved in for good. Ji Deokbong went off to hunt down a herb channel against the alchemy to come. I walked the shops and eating houses, marking the prices of pills and asking after the way into the Sonon sword sect. Half a day later, I came back to the yard with my brow deeply furrowed. Ji Deokbong asked what the matter was. Nothing, I told him, only that I had found out the sect's apprenticeship rules, and they had changed yet again. The rules the old man had given us in the carriage were years out of date. Over the seasons, the more so as people flooded toward the city, the sect had come to shift its way of taking disciples nearly every month. He asked, curious what it had changed into. Last time, the talk of marrow refining under 20 had already staggered him. He had cultivated a whole life and to this day sat stuck at the bone-forging realm, without a glimpse of the realm beyond. By the new rules of the last 2 months, a man who had never touched martial arts could enter if his talent and comprehension ability passed the test before he turned 13. A man coming in with prior training had to be at the bone-forging realm by 15, and the marrow refining realm by 18. Ji Deokbong froze a moment, thinking he had misheard, and then his mouth split into a grin. The old rules had been mad enough, and he saw now how narrow his view had been. That madder ones still existed. Marrow refining before 18 was surely brutal even in a place like Sonon City, he said. A man's achievement in the arts leaned partly on his family, since a martial artist parent passed some of that gift down. A born genius here stood far better placed than one in the countryside. Yet the marrow refining realm was, after all, no easy step. I said that was so, and that was why most who entered the Seonon sword sect were the young ones. Cultivated from the root, they were better in loyalty and better in the shaping than any man who came in already made. He asked whether the sect had taken many people lately, since only a glut of newcomers would drive it to tighten so. Too many, I answered, all of them fleeing here for refuge. With so many to choose from, the sect naturally skimmed the finest cream. Behemoth though it was, it still needed hands to teach and resources to parcel out, and it had swollen too fast, so it was likely worn thin itself. Rumor even ran that this month the rules might change once more. Their apprenticeship this month fell 5 days off. There was word that in time they would stop taking disciples monthly and move to once a season, or once a half year, or once a year. For an older martial artist like me, the hope had grown very thin. For 2 days running, the two of us gathered word about Seonun City. Ji Deokbong turned up a decent herb channel at last, while I walked better than half the city, the shop-clustered quarters above all. The prices of pills had naturally dropped again against Hyunbun City. A Cheongryong pill sold here at 10 won, a Jangbu pill at 25, a Biryong pill at 95. The Biryong pill had fallen the least, a medicine for the organ refining realm holding its value strongest, and to my regret I still could not refine it. As for pill formulas, the range on sale had grown very wide, even the Cheongryong pills formula going cheap, only the Jangbu pills staying fairly close held. A man who wished to learn that one had to bind himself to a medical hall or pharmacy for years by contract, and the Biryong pills terms were stricter still. Sonon City had its stall streets too, where cultivators laid out their wares on a scale far past Hyunbun Cities. The goods were strange and varied, better than 20 people selling pills alone, the competition fierce enough to show how much talent had gathered here. On the third morning, Ji Deokbong brought me a package of herbs, all of them for the Cheongryong pill. The Janggu pill's proficiency, being a thing of simplification, could only farm its experience through the refining of Cheongryong pills. With the Jangbu pill now near perfection, I reckon that if I threw myself at Cheongryong pills, I could lift it to great perfection in about a month. As a newcomer to the city, it suited caution to sell Cheongryong pills first, common as they were. The profit was real but never fat enough to make a man envious, given the city's scale. So long as I held the quantity down, I could test the water. Best of all would be a great backer like the Sonon sword sect, but with its apprenticeship as it now stood, I could not be sure I would ever have the chance. On the fourth morning, I handed Ji Deokbong 100 Cheongryong pills, some of them refined back in Hyunbun City and kept in my space grid. There was still food from Pyongyang County stored in there, which I never ate and kept purely as a keepsake. At noon, Ji Deokbong came back and I looked at him in some surprise. A big city truly was another world, he said with a smile. A buyer had taken a needle, pricked one of the pills to test it, then bought out the whole 100 at 8 won each. He split the silver and passed my share across, and I was surprised in my turn, not having thought the inspection of pills here already so keen. That afternoon I refined more pills and drilled my sword and my archery. I would go to the Sonon sword sect in the morning, and to claim I was not nervous would have been a plain lie. If only I could enter, More than half the road of my martial life would open before me. Yet the moment I thought of what the sect now demanded, a dull ache started in my teeth. It was too hard. Early on the 5th day I rose, and after a word to Jidokbang I went straight out. I was far from the only man in Sonun City up so early. The Sonun Sword Sect stood outside the city, half an hour's travel to the foot of its mountain. Though it was not yet light, a great crowd had already gathered there. Every face was bright with hope, those who knew one another chatting low, their eyes lifting again and again toward the sect's mountain gate, filled with longing. I settled my mind and listened to the talk around me. Better than half of them, sure enough, had rushed in from other cities. Apart from those who had come purely to apprentice out of love for the sect, a large share were refugees like me. Someone cried out that they were here. The hour reached the dragon, and several figures came shooting down the mountain to stand before the crowd in a breath. My eyes narrowed without my meaning them to, for the speed was simply too great. The movement technique I had prided myself on held no advantage at all, and by their easy air they had plainly not spent their full strength coming down. Biomsu called for an end to the idle talk, running his eye over the crowd. To enter the Seonon sword sect, a man needed both comprehension ability and natural talent, neither one lacking. Those under 13 were to follow one junior brother up the mountain to be tested. Those under 15 at the bone forging realm were to follow another, and those under 18 at the marrow refining realm to come up with him. Those were the rules, he finished, and bid everyone begin. Someone shouted after him as he made to turn back up the mountain, asking what of the men over 18. The sect was not taking anyone over 18 for the time being, Biomsu said with a shake of his head. A man demanded whether they were not even to be given a chance to test, when the sect had always tested comprehension ability and talent before. Many grew anxious at once, and I could not help fixing my eyes on BOMCU myself. It had already been changed, he answered in a deep voice, and that was how it stood today. Someone cried out how it could be like this, that a man who had come 1,000 miles was turned off without a chance. Another swore he had come late to the arts and still reached the flesh refining stage inside a year. In a few more months he would surely touch the bone forging realm, he said, and asked whether even that would not do. A late start did not mean poor talent. Others took it up, and nearly half the crowd erupted, the ground gone loud and bitter in a breath. A voice thundered for silence, and the sound rang in every ear at once. Men of weaker cultivation dropped straight to the ground, and all other noise vanished on the instant. Luck, too, was a part of the martial road, Biomsu said, his gaze sweeping the crowd. To have come late to the arts was simply to have been unlucky. Now those who met the mark were to go up and be tested, and everyone else to disperse. His immense aura pressed the breath out of many, and heads bowed low without their choosing it. I met his eyes for a fleeting moment, and drew not the least flicker of his notice. I took a deep breath and slowly let it out. Things in a life rarely run to a man's plan. I had turned 100 versions of this apprenticeship over in my mind, and never once the version where the sect would not grant me a single chance to be tested. As Biomsu had said, luck was a part of the arts, or rather a part of the whole of a life. When there was no opening, there simply was none. Those who met the mark began to line up for the climb, while the rest, unwilling to leave, only stood and watched, hoping some miracle might yet fall. A tangle of thoughts ran through me, and in the end I only shook my head, since a martial artist my age had no chance at all. At the Whiny Mortal Inn, a broker laid a slip of paper before me. 3 schools were listed on it where a man could apprentice, none the equal of the Sonon sword sect. Yet each carried a legacy of no short history, several even tied in some way to the great sect. He had roughed in the sight and the character of each school's cultivation technique legacy. I told the broker he was truly well prepared. I had come to the inn only to sit a while, yet he had read my purpose at a glance, a business sense past belief. He chuckled and said he was only earning a little money. I asked what he charged. He said it was 10 of silver, his face going suddenly grave, and so long as it was a thing he knew he would tell me all and hold nothing back. I called the waiter and had a cup of tea served him, and his face was all smiles. The deal struck. Half an hour on, the broker left. What he knew ran wide, all of it public knowledge, but enough to save me a great deal of time. Bukdu Tower, the Janghong sect, and the Chimsu Pavilion were the 3 schools' names, and by his account they stood even in strength, each legacy with a flavor of its own. There were smaller schools scattered near Seonon City besides, only far weaker, some once glorious and since brought low. The Chimsu Pavilion took only female disciples, so I could set it aside. The Janghong sect ran to spear techniques, which was no fault in itself, only they took none but boys under 13, and wanted no one already trained. The men of Bukdu Tower were ascetics who could never marry their whole lives, their technique a chastity-bound art that broke the moment a man wed. At best, it left him stalled forever, at worst, sliding backward through his realms. After hearing the 3 of them out, I felt wretched. So there were real reasons these 3 could not best the Sonon sword sect, hedged as they were with restriction and carrying techniques that could not stand beside the great sects. I had thought that failing my first choice I would take my second, I muttered, and never guessed I would come down to my third. I said I would try the Wanjin sword sect. What I knew of it turned over in my mind. Its legacy was nothing weak, on a level with the three schools like the Chimsu Pavilion. Only its most famous recent technique, the Startling Thunder Sword, had gone years without anyone cultivating it to the highest rung, so its overall strength and its top fighters stood a shade below the other three, and the present sect leader seemed a poor hand at management. I had asked the broker whether there was any tie between this Startling Thunder Sword and the Startling Thunder Sword energy. The names were so near, and the Sonun Sword sect's Startling Thunder Sword energy so renowned. He had made to shake his head, then see me take out 5 more one of silver, and changed his tune to a whisper. He had heard that the ancestral master of the Wanjin sword sect, having witnessed the Startling Thunder Sword energy, judged it nothing special, so he forged a Startling Thunder Sword of his own to suppress it. I said there were flaws worked into it, so that it was very hard to cultivate. That much he truly did not know. The broker laughed, and would say no more. I drained my cup and left the restaurant. An hour later I stood below a mountain gate. Today was the Wanjin sword sect's day to recruit as well, but set against the crush at the Sonon sword sect, the people here were far fewer, though thankfully not none. A quarter of an hour later I carried a waist plaque and a secret manual, and the whole of it had cost me 101. I was now an outer sect disciple of the Wanjin sword sect. If I could cultivate the sword technique in my hands to its peak within half a year, and pass the test, I would become a true disciple in earnest. I looked at the secret manual with a tangled feeling, unable to shake the sense that I had just walked into a large martial arts gym. Ji-Dao Bong asked whether I had gotten in the moment I came through the yard gate back in Sonon City. The Sonon sword sect gave me no chance, I said, so I went to the Wanjin sword sect instead, and I showed him my waist token. They had grown much stricter, he said, and felt the pity of it for me. The Sinon sword sect was the strongest school anywhere near, the best choice for legacy and backing both. There had simply been too many people, I said, with some regret of my own. My aim had always been the Sinon sword sect, and I had even picked up a move or two of theirs along the way. It was because I had learned their sword work that I knew its power. There was nothing to be done when a sect would not have you. The standing of the two sides never equal to begin with. He said he had heard of the Wanjin sword sect, and asked whether their legacy held something called the Great Thunder Sword. I asked in surprise whether the Great Thunder Sword was not simply the Thunder Sword. I wondered whether it had ever gone by that name, and why anyone would hang a great on the front of it. He had only caught it from people outside, Ji-Dao Bong said, a little confused himself. I opened my mouth and found nothing to say, since this Great Thunder Sword sounded for all the world like a deliberate attempt to outname the Startling Thunder Sword energy. After a few hours spent refining the day's Chungryong pills and handing them to Ji-Dao Bong, I took out the secret manual the Wanjin sword sect had given me. Now that I had joined, what I needed to weigh was how to come by a stronger cultivation technique legacy inside the sect. The Wanjin sword sect had the look of a large martial arts hall now, but such halls were not without their uses. Pay and they took you, and once you showed talent enough they led you straight to the true legacy. The Chaowon sword was the name of the manual. I spent an hour reading it through and was mildly surprised, for though the sect let a man in merely by paying, they had no mind to cheat him. The Chaowon sword was the sect's introductory sword technique, basic and yet no weakling, dovetailing perfectly into the sect's later legacy. By my present feel, it stood only a shade under my own fire pattern sword. That was a thing I had built only by fusing several sword techniques together. It was a sign that the sword work I'd come by in Gyeonggyeom County was truly a bit of trash, near outdone by an introductory form. The panel asked whether I would spend 81 to simplify the Chaowon sword, and I willed it done. The simplification succeeded, and the Chaowon sword became, of all things, sword swinging. I looked at the result with some surprise, not that swinging a sword was hard, but that the simplification had come out so oddly ordinary. I took up my long sword and went out into the courtyard. After the blood-tasting goo in Hyungbun City, I had grown more careful. Once in Sonun City, I had bought certain herbs and mixed a wash that stripped the lingering aura clean off a blade. A large bottle of it stored in the space grid for later. The forms of the fire-patterned sword unfolded in my hands, and I sank quickly into the practice. After an incense stick's time, I stopped and let out a breath of stale air. The panel set my Chaowon sword at proficient, 102 marks out of 1,000, and a smile rose to my face. Drilling the technique straight was far more interesting than swinging blindly, and it let me turn the old over into the new besides. At this pace, with a little diligence, I judged I could carry the whole set to great perfection in a few days, and then applied a test into the inner sect. Would that seem too glaring? I had turned the question over at the start, since the sect had granted me a full half year. But should I dawdle on purpose and squat there for the sake of looking unremarkable? It was only an introductory technique in any case. My aim was a stronger cultivation technique, the sooner the better, so my strength might climb faster. So long as my realm rose quickly enough, I would have the power to answer danger when it came. 7 days flew past. Each morning I refined pills. Each afternoon I cultivated my inner energy technique and looked over my archery. And the hours left I gave to the Chowan sword. The pill sales gave no trouble yet, and I was careful, keeping the count under 100 a day. Whether Sonon City simply looked down on the profit from a few pills, or was still quietly digging into my background, I could not tell. In the long run, someone would fix on the two of us all the same, for several hundred won a day was too weighty a thing to overlook. That was exactly why I thought to join the Sonon sword sect and settle the matter at a stroke. With the Sionon sword sect closed to me, the Wanjin sword sect would serve as a backer well enough. Only an outer sect disciple was far from enough. I needed to be an inner sect disciple, or better still, a true disciple. Early in the morning I arrived at the Wanjin sword sect's mountain gate. The Chowan sword carried to great perfection. I meant to take the assessment today and stand as a disciple in truth. The deacon disciple glanced at the waist token I handed over, read the number carved on it, and looked up in surprise, saying I had only joined a few days back. I said I had. It seemed I had learned the Chowan sword before, he said, nodding, and told me to follow him. My expression shifted a little, for there were evidently no few men who came to test the moment they received the Chowan sword. Thinking on it though, it was natural. The Chowan sword could be had almost for the paying, and the Wanjin sword sect had never troubled over keeping it secret. Or perhaps they did this on purpose, casting a wide net to draw in disciples. I followed the deacon disciple, took in the sights of the sect along the way, and came to the hidden dragon hall. The deacon disciple bowed to senior brother Yang and said this junior brother Jin had come for the promotion test. Yang Qianjin had been sitting with his eyes closed to rest his mind, and at the voice he looked up at me, a warm smile spreading across his face. Here was another one, he remarked. The sect's numbers had grown quite prosperous of late. It was all owed to the sect leader's wise leadership, the deacon disciple said quickly. Yang Qianjin nodded, rose, came over and looked me up and down. The Chowan sword was the foundation establishing sword technique of the Wanjin sword sect, Yang Qianjin said, prizing groundwork and practice. He asked whether I had truly decided to test today, warning that a failure meant another 3 months wait, and a second failure a whole year. I bowed in earnest and begged the senior brother to enlighten me. He gave his approval and gestured me up onto the martial stage. I stepped up with my right foot and Yang Cheonjin smiled faintly, his figure flickering until he stood across from me. I was to use the Chowan sword with all my strength and hold nothing back, he told me. I begged his pardon for my discourtesy, and I did not stand on ceremony. Yang Cheonjin carried at the least the cultivation of the marrow refining realm, and short of sword 5 I could not touch him at all. With a single step I was in front of Yang Cheonjin, the long sword in my hand flashing out toward his chest. He voiced his approval, his eyes lighting at once, for from that one strike alone he could read the foundation I held in the way of the sword. He turned my thrust aside offhandedly and countered with a stroke of his own, another move of the Chowan sword. My expression never changed, the longsword blocking him as if by instinct. In the space of a few breaths we had traded dozens of moves with no winner between us. The deacon disciple stood below the stage, his easy look slowly turning grave. The cause of his gravity was of course not Yang Cheonjin, but me. Though Yang Cheonjin had pressed his own realm down to the bone-forging realm, his grounding in the way of the sword was past any ordinary martial artist's. His grasp of the Chowan sword had risen very high, so that against loose cultivators of his rank he could often settle the matter in a few strokes. Yet here I met him blow for blow with room to spare, until the deacon disciple half believed he had misjudged. No matter how a man drilled beforehand, to cultivate the Chowan sword this far without a school's guidance was fraught with thorns. Among the outer disciples who came to test, those who had mastered the form this well were exceedingly rare. Our blades met with a dull, heavy ring, and I slid back several steps before I came to a stop, the longsword still humming. Yang Qianjin said I had won, his face full of smiles, admitting he had used the power of the marrow refining realm just then. Had he kept his realm suppressed a moment longer, he suspected he would have taken a wound, and that would have been too unsightly. The deacon disciple congratulated me and gestured with a smile for me to follow him. His manner had turned plainly warmer since an inner sect disciple already counted as a true member, and could not be set beside an outer one. The foundation of the sword work I had shown was quite out of the common run, and though my cultivation stood low for now, my future was worth waiting on. I cupped my hands to Yang Cheonjin and followed the deacon disciple out of the hidden dragon hall. Yang Cheonjin stood where he was, the smile on his face fading by degrees into something cool and remote, a sharp turn from the warmth of a moment before. After my name was set down and a new waist token given me, the deacon disciple led me on a brief round of the Wanjin sword sect, naming the use of each place. In its prime, he said with a touch of pride, the sect had held the legacies of 4 peaks and 3 veins. Its sect-guarding cultivation technique, the Wanjin Sword Cannon, had fused the arts of those 4 peaks and 3 veins into a power beyond compare that shook the age. I said nothing, only listened. In recent years, though, his voice dropping low, great crises had struck, and though the sect survived, some of its legacies were lost. I asked then which vein's legacy I could learn. It was far too early to speak of that, he said with a smile. For a man had to become a true disciple before he might come near the true legacies. Without passing the tests, the sect would never hand its top-tier arts to what might prove the wrong hands. I asked what would become of me then. Following the order, the school had already set the martial uncle Peng Supo over me as my master, and all my future study of cultivation technique would fall under him. Even as he said it, he led me to a courtyard. The deacon disciple called from outside to ask whether the martial uncle Peng Supo was within, saying this disciple had a matter to beg an audience on. A figure appeared without a sound in the doorway, and seeing me, his brow knit. The school had lately foisted 18 disciples on him, he said, and he could barely teach that many alone, so he demanded to know why they were piling on more now. The deacon disciple begged the martial uncle to calm his anger, a bitter smile on his face, saying this was the school's arrangement and a disciple like him had no standing to question it. Peng Supo let out a short, displeased breath and took the paper that carried my particulars. My age and my bone-forging cultivation deepened his frown, but the sight of my showing in the promotion test softened his look a shade. He told me past the deacon disciple to demonstrate the Chowan sword. I nodded, took up the long sword and set to demonstrating it on the spot. Carried to great perfection, every move and stance had become instinct in me, so that as I ran through it the technique came out supremely elegant and quick. It all but laid bare the whole essence of the Chowan sword. Peng Supo's knotted brows eased slowly loose, and a flicker of surprise showed in his eyes. The Chowan sword I was giving him now was, even had he performed it himself, no finer than this. The vexation he had felt at the school forcing more mouths on him drained away by a fair measure. He did not yet know how long the form had taken me, but a man who could cultivate the Chowan sword this far would find the sect's other sword techniques far easier going ahead. Only my cultivation was still too poor, early bone forging at my age. The hope of my going far in the years to come ran somewhat thin. Peng Supo said after a while that would do. I sheathed the sword and stood to one side. With the martial uncle's temper eased and his displeasure gone, the deacon disciple excused himself quickly, having no wish to be scolded for nothing, since Peng Supo's temper was notoriously foul. Peng Supo watched him go, then turned to me. I had heard how it was, he said. With so many disciples under him, he could not guide me at every turn. Most of the time I would have to work on my own, and come to him with whatever I could not puzzle out. I said this disciple understood, cupping my hands. Well pleased with me, he gave a slight nod, took me into his study, and handed me a secret manual. I was to carry it home and read it first, then return it in a few days, and come at the rabbit hour tomorrow morning to meet my other senior brothers. I thanked the master, and joy rose in my face at a glance at the manual, for I had a cultivation technique at last. It was no top-tier legacy of the Wanjin sword sect, but I was no longer a loose cultivator scouring the streets for something to practice. A quarter of an hour later, I took my leave. Peng Supo watched my retreating back and gave a slight shake of his head. The Chowan sword had drawn him into testing my aptitude, and the result had been truly hard to look upon, my having reached the bone-forging realm at all a small surprise to him. At this age, with this aptitude, even granting my comprehension ability ran a little better, my road in the martial arts would in the end not carry me far. I came back to the room the school had set aside for me, shut the door in my haste, and looked at the secret manual in my hands. The Tanwan technique. I spent 2 hours reading the manual through several times, then rubbed my dry eyes, set it aside, and sat thinking. The Tongwan technique was the cultivation technique every intersect disciple of the Wanjin sword sect had to practice. Only by completing it did a man earn the chance to reach for the sect's true legacy. It ran to 5 levels in all, and what I held was only the steps of the first. Yet that first level alone stood on a par with the cloud-swallowing force I had bought long ago. The Gyeontan art I had fused for myself was a touch stronger mind, above all on the point of lifting the limit on medicinal pills, where the Tongwan technique fell well behind. Still, the Tongwan technique had its 5 levels, each harder than the last and each better besides. At the 3rd level, the technique would even throw off a special trait of its own, just like the trait that came of carrying the Chongsim technique to great perfection. Only today did I grasp that the measure of a good cultivation technique lay in how many traits it could bear. These traits were no mere gilding on the lily, but a thing that lifted a technique's power to a higher plane. It was the way the Chongsim technique's trait of stretched thin time had swelled my strength so greatly. At its 3rd level, the Tonwan technique would yield its first trait, giant strength, and at the 5th its second, iron bones. I held only the first level's method now, and to gain the later ones I would have to carry the first to perfection before I could apply. The whole thing was kept under strict control, worlds apart from the Chowan sword. I sat cross-legged and tried to run my internal strength along the Tongwan technique's path. It stumbled at the start, but half an hour on I could circulate the first level from end to end. The panel set the first level of the Tongwan technique at 1 mark out of 1,000. The proficiency was no longer split by the entry and mastery grades, I noted with some surprise. I wondered whether that owed to the technique being cut into 5 levels, for I had thought each level would run as before. Perhaps it came of the Tongwan technique in my hands being no complete set. A full one would likely carry its own progress from entry through to great perfection. I called for the Gyungtan art to be fused in, and the first level of the Tongwan technique jumped to 693 out of 1,000. Insights flowed into my mind. In the fusing, most of the Gyungtan art had been shed, only some essence kept, such as the refining of medicinal pills and the swift circulation. Everything else bent toward the Tongwan technique, so that even the name of the technique had not changed. The panel then asked whether I would spend 1,001 to simplify the first level of the Tongwan technique. It had grown dearer, I could not help grimacing to see. The simplification succeeded, and the first level of the Tongwan technique became the Gyungtan art. The nesting had taken. From now on, so long as I circulated the Gyungtan art, I would carry the first level to its peak, at which point I could press on into the second level and the third. Partway through, I made a trip back to Seonan City to lay the matter out for Ji Deokbong. He was to come to the Wonjin sword sect for his medicinal pills from here on. It put a little more trouble on him, but it was quietly a good deal safer. If people saw Ji Deokbong turning up every day for pills, they would sooner or later dig into the why of it. I was now an inner sect disciple of the Wonjin sword sect, a scrap of backing enough to warn off the pettier thieves. To be wholly secure, of course, the name of an inner sect disciple was nowhere near enough. I would need another layer of tie, my master Peng Supo say. But a thing like that could not be rushed. I did not yet understand what manner of man Peng Supo truly was. Handled clumsily, it could prove like leading a wolf into the house, one I would not be able to drive out again. Early the next morning, I came to Peng Supo's courtyard and found many people already waiting outside. More than a few could not help stealing a second look at me. One of them came up and asked with some curiosity whether I was the new disciple the master had taken and what my name was. I gave my name as Jin Bi and said I had entered the sect only yesterday, fortunate enough to be accepted by the master. Then I had to be the junior brother, he said. His name was Senior Brother Na Gun, and I might call him Senior Brother Na. Joy broke across Na Gun's face, for he was at last no longer the youngest among them. I greeted Senior Brother Na, somewhat at a loss, not understanding what he found to be so glad about. If I did not follow a thing in the days to come, he said, patting my shoulder with a great show of seasoned maturity, I might come to him. I shook my head and chuckled, for this Na Gun seemed an interesting sort of man. After a while, Peng Supo appeared before us all, presented me to the group, and set to laying out the key points of cultivating the Tongwan technique. Whether to meet me halfway or because so many freshly entered disciples stood there, he dwelt mainly on the first level. The Tongwan technique was our basic cultivation technique, he said, and it laid its whole weight on the foundation. If the foundation stood unsteady, a man would never cultivate the levels above it however he tried, and he hoped we would take that to heart. An hour on he rose, ran his eye over us all, and spoke in a grave voice. All the disciples answered at once that they would respectfully follow the master's teaching. The rest of them might disperse and come back in half a month, he said, and Jinbi and Senior Brother Guok Rimson were to stay behind. He waved his hand, and the others bowed and left. Senior Brother Guak Rimson bowed to the master and to me in greeting. He was a burly man with tiger-bright eyes and a bristling beard. Jinbi had only just entered the sect, Peng Supo said, so he was bound to have many questions about the cultivation technique. Being often busy himself, he found it hard to guide me at every turn, so from now on, whenever I had a question, Guak Rimson was to do his best to answer it. Peng Supo was well satisfied with Guak Rimsan. Of all the disciples he had taken, Guak Rimsan's cultivation stood the highest, already at the peak of the marrow refining realm. After a while longer honing it, he could try for a breakthrough into the organ refining realm. He had carried the Tongwan technique to its 4th level too, long since comprehending the giant strength trait, and was fit to guide newly entered disciples. He told the master to rest assured, a simple and honest smile spreading over his face, that he would take good care of me. Peng Supo nodded and looked to me. The Tongwan technique prized talent, he said, but it prized diligence no less. I was to ponder the mysteries of the technique often, and to ask others whenever I met something I could not follow. Only so could a man go further on the road of the martial arts. I thanked the master for his teaching, and lowered my head. Peng Supo had accepted me and did not treat me as an outsider. Only he did not look for very much from me. It was understandable enough. My aptitude and my age sat there for all to see, and for an ordinary man they were, in truth, an obstacle no effort could cross. Pung Supo nodded that we could all disperse if there was nothing else, then turned and went back into the house. Senior brother Guac Rimson gave me an honest smile, clapped a firm hand on my shoulder, and told me to start my studying. He said to come find him any time a question came up, and even to drop by and sit a while when I had none at all. I cupped my hands and made to head back to my own quarters. By the hour, G Dopebong should have reached the city already, so it was a good time to go meet him.